Hello, everyone. Just before this video starts, I just wanted to mention that I was recently on the Who Game Shows channel participating in a Doctor Who version of The Chase. So I was on episode 3, and it was honestly so fun putting my Doctor Who knowledge to the test. And yeah, it was just such a great video to do. I'd never done anything like that before. And yeah, it was greatly executed, felt just like The Chase. So I'll leave the link in the description. So go check out the episode I was on if you fancy, and just go check out in general Hugh Game Show's lovely guy, and the 3 episodes he put together were all great, and it was great fun to be in. So if you're interested, check out that video and check out all of his works. They're really cool. But anyway, let's go on with the video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Cosmic Convention, the Pickles Parker Podcast, where we talk about the greatest show in the galaxy, Doctor Who. Now today I'm joined by a very special guest, Wingy Media. Say hello.
Hello.
Now obviously you are a YouTuber who talks about Doctor Who and a few other things as well. And for me, I've been watching your videos for absolutely ages. I remember when you were on 600 subs, I think, when I subscribed, and I essentially, because you were a big inspiration for me when I started the channel, I kind of took a lot of inspiration from you, in the sense that I decided to make my channel about a variety of different things rather than just Doctor Who, which I guess is kind of your thing, because although you do talk about Doctor Who quite a lot, you also talk about a lot of other things you like, such as like Star Wars and Marvel and DC and all that kind of stuff, which I kind of took a lot of inspiration from, because I know a lot of people kind of stick to Doctor Who. But you don't know if there's kind of like a correlation. If you kind of stick to one topic, then maybe you become more popular. I don't necessarily know, because I know a lot of people say that you need to kind of find a niche to kind of gain an audience, but I think that in some ways doing a variety of different things is kind of better, because it doesn't really kind of keep you to one style of content, I guess. And if you ever were to do something else, and you kind of were to stop talking about Doctor Who, I guess you'd kind of have free reign to stop doing that, because you've never kind of got yourself in a box where your audience is only watching you because of Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, by the way, as well, for saying all that. Because, I remember you commenting, like, ages ago. And it must be years ago now.
Yeah.
Because I remember, like, various different Q&As and stuff, like, you always used to pop up. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
But yeah, no, I never wanted to limit myself, because I just knew the sort of channels that I would want to watch. And I was just like, right, well, I'll make that then. Because I think it gets to a point with certain YouTubers as well, where people don't necessarily watch for what you're talking about. They end up watching for you.
Yeah.
Because I know I've done that myself. There's various other YouTubers that I watch, and I don't really care about what they're talking about. I'll just stick it on because it's them.
Yeah.
So I think part of it's that, and also, like you say, like, Doctor Who is not going to be around forever. And obviously it's in a very interesting place at the minute, shall we say, for various different fans. So, and yeah, so I just like talking about a variety of stuff, really. I mean, the last video I did was Transformers. Before that, it was The Boys. So it's just stuff I want to talk about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right about watching YouTubers because of them rather than like what they talk about. Because I know, like, for you, I've watched videos where you talk about like Transformers and Pokemon, which I'm not really interested in myself, but I kind of watch it because I like watching you as a YouTuber. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, I do think that Doctor Who isn't going to be around forever, and I think you see a lot of YouTubers. I think the Who addicts kind of try to revamp their channel and try and change it, and they didn't quite have the audience kind of sticking around, because they'd built their whole basis off of being a Doctor Who channel, whereas with you, obviously, right from the beginning, you've always been doing a variety of different things. So if the kind of Doctor Who content slowed down a bit, then that would never be an issue. I kind of went through a thing where after Series 11 and Resolution, I kind of stopped making Doctor Who videos because I kind of lost the enthusiasm. So I think that I kind of took a year off. I think I did my Resolution review, and my next Doctor Who review after that was my Spyfall review, like a year later, because I kind of took a year off and talked about more like Spider-Man and Star Wars, kind of things that were kind of happening at the time. I guess that I was interested in a bit more than I was with Doctor Who at that time. So I guess it's certainly good, I guess, to kind of not put yourself into a box and just talk about a variety of different things. And I guess in a sense, then you are going to get more of a variety of different people watching your content, because you get some people who might subscribe for Star Wars stuff or Doctor Who stuff or Pokemon stuff. And yeah, you especially talk about a variety of different things, because like Doctor Who, Marvel, Star Wars, DC, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Transformers. You've spoken about football as well in the past.
Yeah.
So you've really like done just all sorts, which I think is great.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, it's just stuff that I enjoy. So I don't necessarily. I mean, there are going to be some people who specifically just want me to talk about Doctor Who, and I've had people just say like, "Why are you doing this video? Just do Doctor Who again." But it just is what it is. Like, it depends what I'm into, because I've always been a bit of a person who is like, I'll focus on one thing for a bit and then my attention will shift. I can't sort of focus on multiple things, so I get into like a Doctor Who mood, and then that'll pass after a few weeks, and it's like, right, well, I'm in a Marvel mood now, and that sort of thing. And so I don't want to. I mean, I'm probably going to be talking about other random stuff soon, because I've got a few different ideas of other stuff that I've never spoken about before. So I just have to see how it goes. But it's fun. Like, I don't know if you watch him, but Mr. Sunday Movies, like his content on his channel, like it's literally just everything that I like pretty much, and I just love watching it. So that's what I just wanted to have, a big variety, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your channel is kind of better for it. I guess that, like, how did your channel kind of come about?
Well, it was about 5 years ago now that I actually made that channel. But I didn't do anything with it. It was just there. And then, because I knew I wanted to do something, because I was just like, I watched various different people about their opinions and whatnot, and some of them I was just like, yeah, I kind of agree with that, and others I was like, I don't really agree with that. And then I just found myself being in the middle, and I was just like, I don't really find anybody who's saying or thinking the things that I do, so why don't I just record it? And it just sort of spiraled from there, really. I was just like, right, well, I've got opinions on this show and this film and this, etc. So I was just like, right, let's just talk about it. So I just bought a camera and the various equipment that you need and just cracked on, really. And here we are, over 3 years later that I've been uploaded. Jesus, 3 years. That has gone quick.
Yeah, I guess I kind of had a kind of similar thing as well, because I watched people like yourself and other things, and I found, because I have some very bizarre opinions, I just kind of had a similar thing where I just started making videos just because I wanted to get my opinion out there. And wow, at least for me, I think it's kind of been a progression, because looking back, my early videos are really bad.
Oh, I think everyone has that, though. Every single person is going to... I mean, I don't know last time I watched it, but if I was to go back and look at my first video now, I'd just be like, what are you on about? Like, this is the worst thing ever.
Yeah, I think the weird thing is, though, is that at the time, I thought it was just so good. And now looking back, I thought, how did I think that was good? It's crazy.
I know exactly what you mean, because there's something I remember vividly, the very first edit that I did, and I finished it and I rendered it, and like I watched it back and I watched the full thing, and I was like, oh my god, like I've actually done this. And if I look back at it now, I'd be like, oh my god, you actually did that. Like, Jesus, why did you bother uploading it? But obviously people started watching, so I must have been doing something right, much as yourself as well. So
yeah, I kind of wanted to ask that when you kind of started the channel, did you kind of want it to be, obviously you started on a variety of different topics, but did you kind of know you would speak about quite as much as you've spoken about, or did that kind of come as like a progression as the channel got bigger and you just thought, well, I like this, so I'll make videos about that now? Or did you kind of always plan to make videos on such a wide variety of things?
I think it was from the start. I was just like, right, well, I'm just going to talk about anything and everything and do whatever, because I didn't really know what channel I wanted to be at the beginning. Like, if I look through my early videos now, like there's random vlogs in there, and there's like a challenge video that I did with my mates as well, and I was just finding my feet really. And I mean, there's various different stuff that I've done over the years that I wouldn't do now, just because it's like no one watched them, so there was no point. But yeah, from the get-go, I was always thinking like, yeah, I'm going to talk about this, and this, and it just so happened that Doctor Who was kind of the one that stuck the most, I guess, because if you look at my most viewed videos, I mean, they're all Doctor Who. I think there's one of them that isn't, like some random video, but the majority is Doctor Who. So, I mean, it did for a bit shift more towards Doctor Who stuff, but yeah, the original intent was definitely to just talk about everything and anything that I want, basically.
I guess perhaps why you've kind of gained more of a kind of Doctor Who audience, I suppose, is that's kind of the video that YouTube probably recommended the most. Like, I remember how I found your channel was, I think it was your worst stories of the new series. I think
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was looking for, because I've been editing a video like before I did this earlier, and I was just checking one of my other videos because I was just like, did I do that in this video as well? And then I happened to notice the views on that video, and I think that's my most viewed video now. So it's weird how that one is always like constantly pushed everywhere, and I still get comments on it now.
Yeah, those videos just blew up though. Like, yeah, as I said, that was the one that was kind of recommended to me. I guess your kind of style of like how you make videos is quite unique, in terms of like the Doctor Who community, especially in terms of like you're quite like you don't hold anything back, if you know what I mean. Like some YouTubers kind of try and sugarcoat it and will try and like not swear and be more kid friendly, whereas with you just let it all out, which I think it's great, and it's very entertaining. Kind of your quick style of editing, I think is very entertaining. I guess that's another reason why a lot of people probably come to your channel, is because you're quite unique when compared to a lot of other YouTubers, especially in the Doctor Who community.
Thanks, man. But yeah, no, yeah. I mean, the thing is, again, you do see other people, and I mean, I'm not talking about anyone specifically here, but I have seen videos in the past where I'm just like, I don't believe that you actually think that. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know. But it does sometimes come across where people are holding back and they are biting the tongue a little bit because, I don't know, maybe they want to be recognised by the BBC, or they want to try and get a job there or do something involved with the show. I don't know, whatever it is. And if that's the case, then that's fine. But I don't really like that. I'm not really someone who is going to sugarcoat stuff. Like, if I think something is terrible, I'm just going to be like, you know what, that's terrible, here's why. And you know what, like I say, if people don't like that, then that's fine, but that's just who I am, basically. I respect other people if they do want to sort of bite the tongue a little bit and whatnot, because that's fair enough. Because I know that people want to do YouTube full time, and if you're effing and jeffing all the time and being negative, then you probably aren't going to get your videos monetized that much. But for me, I'm not bothered. I'm just there to express my opinion, and that's it, plain and simply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so great about your channel is you kind of strike a balance, whereas you're very open about what you think. You don't hold anything back, but you don't really kind of veer into like a really negative, almost kind of hateful thing. Like, I think you really strike a really great balance, I think, of kind of yeah, exactly, like saying your opinion and like your kind of candid opinion, but without kind of veering into like calling out people or all that kind of stuff. Because I know that in my Timeless Children review, I kind of had to edit that a fair bit because I was quite sweary in it, and I started saying, "Oh, fuck you, Chibnall," and all this stuff. I started aiming it at Chibnall, and I ended up cutting that cutting that out because it went a bit far.
Bit too far.
Yeah, because I remember my parents were in the other room and they were listening to me like recording there. Like, Jesus, you went a bit far. And yeah, I just ended up cutting some of it out, but I still kind of kept true to my thoughts. But I just thought some of it where I aimed it a bit more at like Chibnall and stuff, I kind of edited it out because yes, that kind of stuff is unneeded. But no, I think that you just strike a really good balance with your content. And yeah, I think when people say about people who aren't such a big fan of the current show or whatever, but still kind of say their opinions and are still quite respectful, you're kind of like the channel that kind of comes to mind with that, because you still say your opinions, as I say, but you also don't kind of go into the like a really negative and almost hateful thing that some people do. I'm obviously not gonna mention names, but yeah, I just think you strike a really good balance with your content.
Well, that's the thing, because it's like, at the end of the day, it's just my opinion. And it's like, there's some people who, like you say, they get so angry about something or they get so worked up about something, but it's the flip side as well. It's other people's reactions that are just like, how dare you think that way and how dare you have that opinion?
Yeah.
Like, why does it bother you? It's just people on the internet. Like, my channel isn't a factual one. It never has been. Like, I've never claimed, like, this is definitively... I mean, probably the titles are a bit clickbait, but I've never definitively gone like, this is the greatest thing ever, and if you disagree, then you're an idiot, and all this sort of stuff. I think people just take stuff way too seriously sometimes, so, like I say, it is that balance, and I do aim to have that balance, because at the end of the day, I don't care if, like, your favourite story, I can absolutely loathe it, but that's not going to change your opinion on it, just like vice versa. Like, if I hate it, it's not going to change my mind that you love it or whatever, so just, it is what it is, and just, you know, opinions are opinions, and it's as simple as that, innit?
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. I asked that. How did you get into Doctor Who?
Well, this goes back a long, long time when I was just a wee boy. Yeah, I think it was definitely series 1. I think it was around the first episode, but I don't distinctly remember exactly when. But it was during series 1, because I knew that my parents were fans of it when they were a kid, and they just put it on, and I enjoyed it as well, and it just went from there pretty much. I just kept watching it then, and then obviously Sarah Jane came back, and that made me interested in the classic series, and then it just spiraled from there pretty much. Like, I was buying classic series DVDs every single week and watching them, was keeping up with the new series, and I just got an unhealthy habit of Doctor Who obsession, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's kind of like the time when most people kind of jumped on board was with series 1, because it was like the tailor-made jumping on point. Like, there was never a better jumping on point than that, because that was when, it was purpose made, because they were expecting so many people to jump on who had never seen Doctor Who. So yeah, it's obviously no surprise that so many people jumped on with series 1. I think what's so interesting with you is that even though you kind of jumped on with the new series, kind of like, well, in your videos you kind of say that kind of one of the nostalgic periods for you is kind of like the classic series and the Tom Baker era, which I guess is quite interesting for someone who kind of got in with the new series to kind of feel so kind of nostalgic about the classic series.
Yeah, it is quite weird that that a series that came out like 20 years before I was born is more nostalgic to me than the thing that was around when I was a kid myself. But I think the problem was for me, the new era. So, funnily enough, the video that I've done is a review of Series 5, and I say in that review that I think that's the last great series of Doctor Who that we've had, and that was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's mental.
And so for me, it was kind of like, I started zoning out of the new series around Series 6, and it's just sort of gone downhill from there for me personally. I mean, there's still good episodes and whatnot, but I always found myself diving into the classic era more and more.
Yeah.
And if someone said to me like, "Oh, are you doing anything today?" I'm like, "No, should we watch Doctor Who?" "Yeah, which story do you want to watch?" "Right, well, I'm going to pick anything from the classic era. I'm 9 times out of 10 going to go and reach for a classic series DVD."
Yeah.
And yeah, it is weird that I have more of an attachment to it, but I just do. I just think that even stories that I grew up with from the modern era or post-2005 era, I don't enjoy anymore. Whereas the classic stuff, I seem to love more and more as time goes on, which is really weird. So I think more often than not on my channel, I mean, I've just said I'm doing a Series 5 review, but more often than not, I am probably going to talk about the classic era from now on, because I want people to check out as well and maybe find, some stories for themselves and a new era or a new Doctor for themselves as well. So hopefully that happens, but we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's quite interesting what you said about Series 5 kind of being the last great series we've had, because I've also been doing kind of a marathon in lockdown of the Revived series. I just finished up Series 5 myself and just...
I know, it was quite awkward because I saw that you'd uploaded the video of the review and I was just like, he's going to think I've copied him, but...
No, it's fine.
Oops.
I kind of expected you to upload your video anyway, because obviously I know you've been doing the review series, but I would agree that although I probably like Series 6 and 7 more than most people, I will acknowledge that I think Series 5 is kind of the last series we got where there wasn't like a bad episode in it.
Yeah.
Which...
Yeah,
that kind of like the kind of Series 1, 4 and 5 and even 3 to a certain extent, at least for me, are kind of series that I think don't really have a dud or too many duds in them. And I guess Series 6 onwards, you always get those bad stories in there, which is a bit annoying. And obviously we haven't really had a perfect or near perfect series in 10 years, like you said, which is quite weird. But I guess understandable, but yeah, it's quite weird to think the last great series we got was 10 years ago. That is definitely very, very strange.
It just shows how, Moffat just lost the plot. I mean, I always rant about Moffat, but it's just amazing how he lost the plot as quickly as he did, because I think the balance in Series 5 of the sort of complicated twists and the mystery boxes that Moffat does and whatnot, I think that he managed it perfectly in Series 5, and he just had to just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger with it, and it just, for me at least, it doesn't work. And then obviously you're going towards the Capaldi era, and that's got its own problems, and then, the current era now, that's got its own problems and whatnot. So, yeah, it's a shame, really, that, because you look at some of the series in the classic series, and they're just consistently great, one episode after the other, whereas now it's just, I don't know what it is, for whatever reason, but for me at least, it's just gone downhill massively.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I certainly would agree on kind of that balance that Moffat spoke about in Series 5, because it's kind of weird, in a lot of my recent videos I've just spoke about it a lot, is the balance of the story arc in Series 5 and why it works so well. And for me, I consider it kind of the best story arc. I just think it works really well, but I think certainly Moffat did get a bit carried away. And I remember at the end of The Big Bang when the Doctor's like, oh, well, we know all this stuff, but we still don't know who blew up the TARDIS, so we need to find that out. And my dad said, so in the next series are we going to find out who blew up the TARDIS? I was just like, nope, it's never mentioned again until Time of the Doctor. So I think he certainly got a bit carried away, and rather than kind of tie up these questions that he left open, he just opened up more questions, and rather than answer who blew up the TARDIS, he opens up the question of the silence and who killed the Doctor. And before he can answer what is up with Trenzalore, he then opens up the question about who is the Impossible Girl. And it all kind of ties together in Time of the Doctor, but I think that there certainly should have been a lot more closure as you were going on through the series, rather than making people wait 3-4 years for answers.
Yeah, it was a bit silly, but it's like some of the stuff that he used to do, with hindsight, it's like, why did you even do that? Like, there were certain plot threads that don't even get resolved in Matt Smith's era that started there. So I think the one was, who's the woman in the shop that gave you my number? And it's like, and it's Missy, and it's like, well, why are you starting that now? Like, you haven't finished your other stuff. Why are you starting something else already? But at least with Moffat, I'll give him the credit of at least he was trying something and he had ideas. But I think the problem with him was a lot of the time he was a fan himself who got a little bit carried away with his own sort of what he would want and not necessarily what everybody would want.
Yeah.
Which possibly is what's happening now as well with Chris Chibnall. I don't know. I genuinely haven't seen Series 12 apart from a few clips, so I don't know the general consensus on it. But I know that a lot of people don't seem to like the Timeless Children and whatnot. So
yeah, I think you're right about kind of even some threads that don't even get tied up in Matt Smith's era, like the whole thing with the TARDIS in the lodger, and then it appears in the Series 6 opener, and it's just not explained. I still don't know what the hell was going on with that, and it's never explained at all. And yeah, I think the whole exploding TARDIS thing, like it said in Time of the Doctor, like the Silence did that, but I still don't understand how the Silence managed to blow up the TARDIS, and that's never explained. Like, and obviously because they don't have time to, because it's just one line in Time of the Doctor. But I think that maybe Series 7 would have been different if Series 6 hadn't have had so much backlash, because with Series 7, obviously, it's less of a story arc. Moffat kind of drops the whole Silence Will Fall Trenzalore thing for the whole of Series 7 until Name of the Doctor. So I wonder if Series 6 hadn't received so much backlash, maybe more things would have been tied up in a more satisfying way in Series 7.
Possibly. I mean, the one thing that I thought of, and I only just thought of this the other day, funnily enough, was because I think it was around Series 6 that Doctor Who started getting big in America, so maybe it was something to do with American audiences not understanding or finding it too complicated too soon or whatnot. I'm not really sure, but I think there's a lot of stuff around that time with, I think maybe even splitting the series up, because if you remember, it was like in 2 parts, wasn't it, both 6 and 7, for no reason, and it never happened again, and I don't know why. So it could be a number of different things, but I remember at the time distinctly not enjoying Series 6 because it was so complicated, and Series 7 I found a bit boring because it didn't really carry on from it, which is weird. If it's weird that you're moaning that something doesn't follow on from something that you don't like, but either way, yeah, it was a weird time, and I often find myself not revisiting those 2 series, but it is what it is, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think certainly I think with the Smith era, even though it does get a bit complicated and Moffat kind of goes in very odd directions, I kind of feel that his heart was still in it, like he still really wanted to tell these stories, whereas when you get into the Capaldi era, it does kind of feel like he's running on empty and reusing ideas, and he just wants to go, but he can't. So, like, he's not really fully invested in some of the ideas like I feel he was at kind of the beginning of his run.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because the Capaldi era is a mess in terms of every series feels totally different, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not different in a tonal way, it's different in inconsistent ways. Like, even Capaldi himself he's a totally different Doctor in each of the series. Because I really like, with hindsight, I quite like Series 8 now. I don't think it's perfect. I think like the first half of it is a lot better than the second half, but I love the 12th Doctor in Series 8, but we never see him again after that. It's this weird hippie uncle in Series 9, and then like a weird mesh of the 2 in Series 10, and it is so bizarre and jarring. And like you say, he did use a lot of plot threads again, didn't he, with certain stuff and similar ideas, and yeah, I think you're right, it did get to a point where Moffat was just sort of like, I'll just do this because it worked before.
Yeah. I think probably the biggest example is in Series 9, where in The Magician's Apprentice, he's just like, I'm going to die, and it's like, you just did that in Matt Smith's era, like, why is it? And it doesn't even go anywhere in Series 9, like, I'm pretty sure him dying is never mentioned after Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar, so, yeah, it's just weird things like that are just kind of thrown in there without any real thought. And yeah, I felt like a lot of the Capaldi era, just Moffat didn't really have his heart in it. And I guess with Russell, even though I'm not a big Series 2 fan, and I'm not really a big fan of some of the things he went with, I think he kind of done the right amount of time where he had done everything he wanted to do, and it never felt like he was repeating things or running out of ideas. He just did what he wanted to do and then left. Whereas with Moffat, I think he stayed too long, because by the time you get to like series 9, he clearly has kind of run out of ideas by that point and is just recycling the same old things. He doesn't really have a clear direction for Capaldi's Doctor, which I think is a massive problem.
Yeah, I agree. Because I remember watching, like, I think around that time, I was still interested in Doctor Who. Like, I would still watch it as it came out.
Yeah.
But Series 9 was the one for me where I was just like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I think there is, for me, 4 episodes out of the entire thing that I like, which is the Lake two-parter, Face the Raven, and Heaven Sent. All the others, I'm just like, if I never see them again, I will be perfectly happy with that.
Yeah.
It was just such a weird series, and annoyingly, I really wanted it to be a better series because I like the fact that it was, for the most part, 2-part stories. Because I was crying out for that. I was like, oh, I really wish. Because I think, was it Series 8 was pretty much just individual episodes, wasn't it? Apart from the finale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was really excited for that. Oh, like multiple part stories, great. The rubbish.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, from looking through Twitter and various comments and whatnot, people seem to really like Series 9, but I don't get it at all.
Neither do I. It's interesting what you say about 2-parters, because obviously I just watched The Impossible Astronaut Day of the Moon, and it's weird thinking there's only one more 2-part story until you get to the Series 8 finale. Like that.
Really?
Yeah, there's only the Rebel Flesh, Almost People, and then the next 2-parter after that is Dark Water, Death and Heaven, which is mental.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't even think of it like that. Yeah, that's mad.
There's like 3 years where there were just no 2-parters at all, which is very, very, very strange. So that's why I was very excited as well about Series 9 and 2-parters, but I think that the problem is that when you have a lot of 2-parters in your series, you kind of have less stories, so you need to make them count, and I don't think Series 9 really did that.
No, especially because the thing that annoyed me the most, kind of going back to what we were saying about me being more nostalgic for the classic series, is the fact that he tried to remake Genesis or add to Genesis of the Daleks, and it's like, it's just not going to work. Like, a lot of that made no sense to me, that story. Especially like the opening of The Magician's Apprentice, where it's the stuff with the planes and whatnot, and I'm like, this doesn't need to be here. This is all about getting to where the story begins. Just start the story where it begins. Like, you don't need to be here. Yeah. And then Davros opens his eyes, and all this sort of random crap, and I'm just like, what are you doing? Oh, that story angers me. Honestly, I'm dreading doing my review of Series 9, because I'm gonna have to watch it again.
Yeah, what really irritates me is just like the little continuity errors that Moffat like contradicts himself. Like in The Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar, there's such a big thing of, Daleks don't know the word mercy, they can't say it, it's not in their vocabulary.
But in Series 5...
Yeah, he literally writes a Dalek shouting mercy, so it's like, do you even know what you're writing half the time? It's mental.
I think part of Moffat is just kind of like, well, Doctor Who doesn't make sense anyway, so it doesn't matter. But there are people like us who are just going to be like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. You need to redo that again, actually. Thank God for the internet.
It's like in Asylum of the Daleks when the Dalek says, we don't kill our own Daleks because hatred is beautiful, and how could we kill Daleks, despite the fact Daleks killing other Daleks has been such a big thing in the show, and even in Victory of the Daleks, a story in his era that he probably had a lot of involvement in, a big point of that is the Paradigm Daleks killing those other Daleks because they think they're impure. So certain lines and things he just throws in that just make no sense because of the rules that he himself established. I don't know what was going on with Moffat half the time, really.
Doesn't he bring back Skaro for no reason in Asylum of the Daleks? Because I'm pretty sure Skaro was gone. I'm pretty sure it was destroyed in Remembrance of the Daleks back in the 80s, but...
Yeah, it was. So it's weird because obviously in Remembrance of the Daleks it's destroyed. Then in Daleks in Manhattan the Dalek says it was lost in the Time War. So maybe the Daleks are kind of implying that Remembrance of the Daleks was kind of like the first move of the Time War or something. I don't know. But then in Asylum of the Daleks, Skaro is just back and it's not explained and the Doctor's on Skaro. Yet then in The Magician's Apprentice, when Skaro's back, they make such a big point and they're like, oh my god, they've rebuilt Skaro. And it's like, but we just saw Skaro a couple of series before. Honestly.
Yeah, that's the thing that the Daleks and the Cybermen especially, I think, have really been through the ringer in the new series because they're always coming back, but their stories get worse. I think the last good Dalek story for me personally was Into the Dalek, and I understand that that's very subjective. I wouldn't say it's like a great story, but I love it. Cybermen, I actually don't think they had a good story past their first appearance, to be honest.
I'd agree. Yeah, it's the only one for me, bar World Enough and Time, but then the Doctor falls.
Oh, of course, yeah. How did I forget that?
I feel that really gets the Cybermen because, Doomsday, the Cybermen are just wasted it. The next Doctor is absolutely terrible, in my opinion. Closing Time, I kind of like as a story, but the Cybermen are absolutely awful in it. They're the worst part of that story. Nightmare in Silver, I can't stand it. It's the worst Matt Smith story in my opinion. And then Dark Water, Death and Heaven, the Cybermen are wasted in that again. And then World Enough and Time, they're good in, but the Doctor Falls, they're kind of wasted in again. And then in the most recent series, obviously you haven't watched it, but the Cybermen are wasted yet again and play second fiddle to the Master yet again 3 times in a row, which is just ridiculous.
That is mental, considering that it's a different showrunner as well, and he's done the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think the Cybermen and the Master had even shared an on-screen appearance other than the 5 Doctors, I think, before Dark Water, Death and Heaven, and now they're it's almost become a thing where they're just so associated with them now. I just don't understand why showrunners feel that they need to put the Master and the Cybermen together. I don't see how those 2 characters even link and how that's even happened 3 times in a row. I just don't understand it.
I don't even get why villains need to team up in different episodes now. I don't see anything wrong with just one alien or villain or whatever per story. It's nice every now and again, and it's quite cool, but it seems to be a regular thing now that let's just throw in a bunch of monsters that people like, and I'm sure it'll work. And it's it doesn't really, does it? It's just a bit of a mess.
Yeah. I think I thought about this. I'm pretty sure the Daleks haven't been the main villain of a finale since series 4, since 2008, which is mental to think that they're supposedly the most iconic villains in Doctor Who, that they haven't been in a finale properly since 2008. Obviously, they were in Pandora Opens The Big Bang, but they weren't really the main threat in that. But it's weird that people are saying Rusty Davies is just bringing out the Daleks again and again and again, and now the Daleks haven't really been in a finale at all in the Moffat or Chibnall era. It's just the Cybermen over and over again. Yeah, it's weird. It's even worse in the I would say it's even worse actually in the most recent series, because there's 2 episodes of a Cyberman story. And then in the final part, the Master just comes in, and then it just goes in a completely different direction. And suddenly the Cyberman stuff just becomes a subplot. And it's just the Master. Yeah, so there's a Mary Shelley episode where the Cyberman kind of comes in halfway through, and then the Master gets this Cyberium, and the Doctor's like, we need to go and stop them. Then the penultimate episode is kind of all about the Cybermen. And then at the end, the Master just comes through a portal. And then the final episode is literally the Master just explaining the Timeless Child stuff to the Doctor, while the companions kind of have to deal with the Cybermen. And then the main Cyberman just gets taken out, and then the Master turns Time Lords into Cybermen, and they all get defeated easily. And it's very strange. It feels like 2 separate stories, but they just shoved the Timeless Child stuff into this unrelated Cyberman story. It's very strange. I just feel that there needs to be a writer who just really wants to do a Cyberman story, rather than a lot of writers. It seems like they're just doing a Dalek or Cyberman story out of obligation at this point.
It sounds it. I mean, to be fair, what you've just described to me then, if you'd have said to me that was somebody's fan film or fan fiction, I would have believed you. That sounds awful, but no, I get what you mean. Because it really frustrated me with World Enough in Time, because I love that episode, and for the entire week I was just like, oh, please deliver on it, please deliver on it, please deliver on it. But it's not. We just get a totally different story, and it's a shame, because I think Daleks and the Cybermen now, they are such iconic villains, but they're losing why people love them, I think, and a lot of people are getting sick of them. Like you say, I think someone does need to come in who wants to write a Cyberman story or wants to write a Dalek story and does it properly and isn't afraid to just use them and use them to their strengths and play on what makes them scary and whatnot. Whereas it has felt for a long time that it's just like, we need a monster, we need a villain, well, these costumes are in storage, let's just chuck them in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with Moffat, it did just feel like he'd just do a Dalek story every so often, just because, out of obligation, just because he felt like he had to write one, and not because he actually wanted to. And yeah, I think the Cybermen as well, like, you look at, especially after Series 2, the Cybermen aren't ever really the main point of their own story. Like, in the next Doctor, they're playing second fiddle to the next Doctor. In Closing Time, they're playing second fiddle to Craig and the Doctor. And in Darkwater, Death in Heaven, second fiddle to the Master. Same in World Enough in Time, the Doctor Falls. And same in the most recent series. The only other time, other than Rise of the Cybermen, that the Cybermen are actually like the centre of their own story is Nightmare in Silver, and unfortunately that is a crap story, but it's weird how the Cybermen are very rarely the main focus of their own story.
It is weird, and it annoys me as someone who is such a big fan of the Cybermen, because, I mean, you look at some of the classic series Cyberman stories, and they are amazing, particularly the Troughton stuff, because during lockdown, like, I've been watching, because we've got BritBox, so we've been watching some of the old Cyberman stuff and whatnot, and like stuff like the Moonbase, the Invasion, Tomb of the Cybermen, Earthshock, these stories are fantastic. Like 10th Planet is another one as well. I think pretty much all the Cybermen stories, bar one or two of them, are really, really great. And it seems like back in the day, they actually knew what they wanted to do with them. They wanted to, I think around, especially in the 60s, because there was this whole thing of the Daleks potentially might be leaving Doctor Who and their own spin-off series in America and whatnot. So they were trying to make the Cybermen like the main villain of Doctor Who again. And you can tell because they're putting the effort in. And it works so, so well. And it's the same with the Daleks as well. Like throughout the 60s, the Dalek stories, for the most part, are amazing. Apart from Genesis, they're all crap in the 70s, I think, personally. But then in the 80s, there's a resurgence of them again, and they're all like fantastic stories, and it just, I don't know where it went wrong, where, writers, like we've been saying, are just not interested in writing them properly or using them to their strengths. It's just bizarre. But it's like they're not even doing that with newer villains now. Because it's like Moffat started off like with the Weeping Angels and whatnot. Their first couple appearances, they were brilliant, and then they fell into the same sort of trap where it's just like they're just there, their costumes are in storage. Sontarans, the exact same thing happened to as well. They're just a joke now. The Zygons, potentially as well, they started off in the 50th looking quite cool, and then the Capaldi story, I think, is rubbish. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of fear factor or scaring any Doctor Who monster at the minute.
No, I'd agree. And I think that it's not... I think it's kind of weird that, especially a few years ago, there's such a big thing of bringing back monsters from the classic series to the revived series, but other than the Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Master, these villains haven't really appeared that much. So I think the Sontarans have only actually had one dedicated story in the revived series, same as the Silurians. I think the Zygons and the Ice Warriors have only had two.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so they haven't really been used that much, and yeah, it's strange to me that rather than try and build up some other villains, they're just using the Daleks and the Cybermen and the Master over and over again, when they clearly don't really have anything new that they want to add to them. But they just use them for name pull, I think, a lot of the time.
Pretty much. Well, the thing that's a real shame is, because a lot of people will use the argument of, well, there isn't much you can do with Daleks and Cybermen right now. And it's like, well, if there wasn't Big Finish doing what they're doing right now, I'd actually believe that. But Big Finish seem to know what to do with them, so it's just weird. But because I'm into Big Finish a lot at the minute, and I'm listening to various different stuff, and the way that you can tell that it's written by fans who understand the program, but you can tell that they want to do something fresh and different with it. And I think the problem with Doctor Who now is I think there's too many writers who are just writers. They're not specifically fans of Doctor Who, or it's the opposite end of the spectrum where they're too big a fan of Doctor Who and they can't objectively see what works and what doesn't because they've got their own vision in their own head. It's a shame, really. I think Doctor Who has needed a bit of fresh blood for a while. You know, someone like Charlie Brooker, I'd love to see write an episode. Steve Pemberton and Rhys Shearsmith, I'd love to see them write an episode based on what they do with Inside Number 9. I think there's some really innovative creatives out there that should be given a chance, but I don't think they will be.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, I just don't understand how no Big Finish writers have been asked to write a story in the revived series. Like, it makes no sense to me when you've got these writers who clearly are doing fresh things with these old Doctors and these old villains, and the success of Big Finish. I just don't understand why no writers have crossed over to the TV series. It really makes no sense to me when they're on a consistent monthly basis, like just chucking out loads of different stories, a lot of them to a high quality. And when the revived series is getting a little bit stale at this point, why they wouldn't bring these people in who clearly have a talent for keeping things fresh and just bring them over. I don't know why that hasn't happened.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show the power of Big Finish, because at the time of recording this, was it yesterday that Eccleston was announced as coming back? So, I mean, I'm really excited for that. I don't know how much Big Finish you listen to or who watches this video, but just go and check it out, because, oh my god, like, I'm so excited for that.
Yes.
But, I mean, I think a couple of Big Finish writers have, because I think Robert Shearman,
Rob Shearman.
I think he... I want to say there's one or two others as well, but overall it isn't many, which is weird. I'm surprised Paul Cornell hasn't been asked to do another one, because I don't think he's written one after Human Nature, Family of Blood, and that was a phenomenal one. So it's like, why was he not invited back, but the guy who wrote In the Forest of the Night was invited back? It doesn't make sense how you'd invite back that writer and not the other one. It baffles me.
Also, I think there's quite a weird thing of writers who are good writing other things, but just are not great Doctor Who writers. So I've been watching Life on Mars recently. I've never seen it before. And
really? Oh, it's brilliant.
I love it. I've finished it now. It's brilliant. But Matthew Graham, he wrote Fear Her and The Rebel Flesh and The Almost People. Crap stories. Yet his Life on Mars stuff is brilliant. I don't understand how you can be so good at that and then just so bad at writing Doctor Who. It just makes no sense to me. And even Chibnall, he wrote a couple of episodes of Life on Mars. I think in those episodes were pretty good, yet that doesn't come through in his Doctor Who work. I don't really know why, like, that it's not kind of translating into Doctor Who.
Well, for the most part, Chibnall's Torchwood stuff is pretty good as well.
Yeah.
Which is set in the same universe, so it's weird how his writing for Doctor Who itself is serviceable enough, but just doesn't seem to be cutting the mustard. It's weird. Because who else was it? There was another writer, like you were saying, like Matthew Graham is one of them. I think, is it Neil Cross who wrote Rings of Akaten and Hyde? And he did Luther, which is a phenomenal series.
Yeah.
And how that didn't translate as well, because Rings of Akaten and Hyde, I think, are pretty crap as well. I know you said that you like Series 7, so sorry.
I don't mind those stories. I think, for me, with Series 7, like, I guess it's quite weird. I quite like Rings of Akaten and Hyde, but I kind of have a soft spot for Series 7, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near my favourite. I think it's very flawed and it has a lot of weak episodes in it. I guess just because Matt Smith's my favourite Doctor, and because that was kind of the first series I kind of watched live from the beginning. So, because this is going to sound really weird, but I started watching with The Girl Who Waited when I was 7, so my first 4 episodes were The Girl Who Waited, The God Complex, Closing Time, and The Wedding of River Song, which is mental, because I went into The Wedding of River Song knowing nothing, and somehow enjoyed it, but I think, because like Series 7 was the first series I watched live, like from beginning, and Osama the Daleks was the first opener I watched live on broadcast. I kind of have a little bit of a soft spot for it, but it's by no means my favourite. I will still acknowledge it is very flawed, but carry on.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean, because it's like my favourite story is The Hand of Fear with Tom, and no one is going to tell me that that's a bad story. I know its faults, I know that it's not perfect, but I absolutely love it. So I get what you mean with the nostalgia stuff. But yeah, in terms of like different writers and stuff, I don't know. Like, is there any other writers off the top of your head that you think could do a good job?
I don't know really. I guess I don't know. Obviously, there's a few big Finnish writers that I think would be great moving into the Revive series. But in terms of like outside Doctor Who writers, I really, honestly, I don't know. I think that again, I'm stumped. My mind's just gone blank actually at the moment. I'm trying to think of things I've watched, but I don't know if those writers would necessarily write a good Doctor Who, because I watched Mad Dogs recently, but I don't think the writers of those would translate to Doctor Who. And obviously, Life on Mars, Matthew Graham's already written Doctor Who, but yeah, I don't really know. But there's bound to be writers out there who would love to write for Doctor Who. And I think there have been some writers who have, some guest writers, even in the Chibnall era, that I think have done a pretty decent job. Obviously, you haven't seen Series 12, but there was a story about Nikola Tesla that I personally thought was the best episode of the series. But I think that there are some writers, but I don't know whether it's the writers they're getting in or just the general direction, because it's weird that the later Moffat years and also the Chibnall era are having the same sort of problems, despite the fact it's completely different production team and writers and cast members. I don't know why they're kind of falling into the same traps, but it is what it is, I guess.
Maybe it just needs a break for a bit. I mean, I've said this for a while, but I think Doctor Who just needs to go away for a little bit so people can actually just refresh themselves, I guess. It's one of them. I think with the classic era, I think that properly burnt out. Because I think it went on consistently for 26 years. And I think there was enough change up in that it managed to last that long. But there was, especially around like the Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy era, it's obvious that the show needed to be taken off air for a little bit. And it's clear that the BBC hated it as well. I mean, I still enjoy the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy stuff, but it's not... I mean, season 24 is an abomination. Yeah. But I think it got to those 26 years, and it's like, there's literally not much more we can do with the series. And obviously it had the breast that it did. And I think it needs something like that again. I mean, I don't want it to disappear for like nearly 20 years again. But if it was to go away for maybe 2, 3, maybe even 5 years, I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world. Like, if you were to just rest it now and then bring it back with the 60th anniversary or something, I think that would work quite well, because then you could bring it back with maybe like Jodie would still be the Doctor probably, and maybe like Eccleston comes back if he wants to do it, and Capaldi and Tennant and Matt Smith and whoever, and that could be quite good. But I don't really know what else people can do with it at the minute. It just seems like they're just making it for the sake of making it, and I feel like the trap that they've fallen into is it's no longer the innovator, because I noticed when it came back, everyone was trying to copy Doctor Who. Everyone wanted to be Doctor Who, whereas I don't think people do now. And again, it's similar to the classic series. Like, it got to a point where Doctor Who wasn't the innovator because people were watching stuff like Star Wars or Buck Rogers and all these other things that were coming over from America.
Yeah.
So who's to say like where it's going to go in the future? But I think if it carries on the way that it is, then it's going to head in a similar direction as the classic era, which is cancellation, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it does certainly need freshening up, but I think maybe it's because we're just kind of stuck in a box where writers are just doing the same formulas. Like, writers will do a really complex series and people will criticize that, and then they'll do a really standalone series and people will criticize that, and then they'll do a complicated series again and people will criticize that, and it's rinse, repeat, rinse and repeat. It feels like you can't. Yeah, we're just going in like a 2 or 3 year loop, and then it'll keep on going and going and going. And I don't know what's gonna change, because it's very weird to me that Chibnall, a writer who is just so far removed from Stephen Moffat, is doing similar things to him. It just really makes no sense to me, and I don't know what's gonna change, what needs to change. I think that maybe what would be better is if we didn't just have one person show running it, if there was kind of more than one person, and kind of like in the classic series there was the producer and the script editor who kind of collaborated on things. I think that would perhaps be better rather than just one person. So I think if maybe with the later Moffat years, if maybe someone like Mark Gatiss collaborated with him a bit more, or someone, maybe we get slightly more fresh ideas rather than just the same old stuff. And maybe we need someone to kind of do that with Chibnall, someone to bring in different ideas and to kind of compromise and collaborate, and maybe that would better the show. I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible, but I mean, I think in the minds of the people at the BBC, changing the Doctor's gender was the refresh, but an aesthetic change, because essentially that is all it is.
Yeah.
That's not really going to do much, you know. And Series 11 was terrible. Yeah. I can't really think of an episode that stood out to me as genuinely really good.
Yeah.
I thought Kablam was probably the best of a bad bunch, but even then, that wasn't great. Like, that'd be probably the weakest episode in any other series. So I think I think they just need to go back to what the roots of Doctor Who are. I think it's borderline parody of itself at this point, you know.
Yeah. Just
running up and down corridors, like the Sananga Conundrum or whatever that one was called, right? It is literally just running up and down corridors. And I think they just need someone someone who's a good character writer, someone who gets what the Doctor actually is, and who the Doctor actually is. And like, because the one thing that I noticed more than anything in Series 11 was I didn't care about anybody. Yes. I didn't care about the companions. I didn't care about their lives. I don't care about this new Doctor. There was nothing about it where I was just like, oh God, if that happens, I'll feel really bad and I'll get upset. Yeah. It's not like when, I mean, I don't like it now, but when I was a kid, I did get a bit emotional that Rose went into that vortex and she couldn't see the Doctor again. Like, I did get emotional that Donna had her memory erased, because I was invested in these people as characters. I was invested in Martha, and I really liked her for saying, you know what, I've had enough, and walking away. Like, stuff like that I thought was brilliant. But now, if someone just turned around to the Doctor and said, right, I'm off, I wouldn't care. I'd be like, okay, right, who's next then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was funny what you said about how, like, the Saranga Conundrum is just running around corridors, because there's that clip of Chris Chibnall in the 80s where he's criticising the Time Lord, where he says it's very much what the audience is expecting, running down corridors and silly monsters, which just sums up Series 11 in a nutshell. But, yeah, I would agree. I don't care about any of the characters, really. Like, I like Graham, but that's more down to Bradley Walsh than the actual character. And I think with Jodie, my biggest problem with her in Series 11 is just there was no complexities there. Like, she was just like a one-note, happy Doctor. And I think what makes the character of the Doctor so interesting is that they're so complex, and that they are a bit quirky, but there's also that serious, cold side, and how, like, they can flip from one to the other, which I think Jodie really lacked in Series 11, which I think is why I didn't connect to her at all. And
yeah, I agree. I agree, because it's like with let me just pick out a random Doctor from the classic era, John Pertwee.
Yeah,
he's got it where he will be light-hearted and he will be jovial and he will be, you know, the sort of slightly quirky. Yeah. That person is clearly an alien type character, but he's got that steel behind him. He's got that bite about him, and you can apply that to every single one of the Doctors. Except her. I don't know what she's like in Series 12. I don't know if she gets better, but from some of the clips that I've seen, I don't think that she's got it. I don't think that she's got that thing that the Doctor has, and it's not something that you can really describe. It's just something like, if you've got it, you've got it, and if you don't, you don't. Tom definitely had it. Patrick definitely had it. Matt and Capaldi certainly had it, and I think all the other Doctors have got parts of it as well. McCoy definitely had it as well. But with Jodie, there's just nothing about her performance where I'm just like, I enjoy that, or I enjoyed her reaction to that, or whatever. It's just sort of like, oh, she'll just scrunch up her face and that's it, or she'll just make an offhanded weird comment and that's it. And it's like, well, you're not really the Doctor. Not that I'm being hashtag not my Doctor. It's just I don't enjoy her performance. But there you are.
I would say that in Series 12, she is improved in terms of like the writing. She gets more serious moments, which were practically non-existent in Series 11. So I would say she is improved in her performance and Chris Chibnall's writing. But yeah, I think there's kind of a trend with Doctors recently where, with Capaldi as well, is that it takes them ages to really find out what they're actually doing with this Doctor. Like with Capaldi, it takes to about Series 10 until they really nail that Doctor. And then, unfortunately, Capaldi's gone. And I feel like it's going to be a similar thing with Jodie, whereas I think they're going to really nail her Doctor in, like, Series 13, but then she's going to be gone. And it's really annoying for almost two incarnations in a row where, it's a bit too little too late. And I think that especially now where first impressions are everything, it's you can't really afford to not really know where you're going with this Doctor for like 2 series. You really need to get a definitive vision from the actor and the writer straight away. And I don't think for Capaldi or for Jodie Whittaker they really had that until the end. And obviously I'm just kind of presuming with Jodie Whittaker, but yeah, I just don't think that they really knew what they were going with their Doctor until towards the end, and it was a bit too little too late.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's like Eccleston had, 13 episodes, and immediately you know exactly who that Doctor is throughout that entire series. Yeah. Matt Smith, straight from the gate in Series 5, you know exactly who that Doctor is. And it is weird that, kind of like we were saying before about Capaldi, how he's a different Doctor in each series. You're absolutely right. I mean, I personally really like that Doctor in Series 8. But I think the best version is probably the Series 10 one, like you're saying, because he has got that balance of the darker stuff as well as the lighter stuff. And it is quite, especially with, they really didn't get it right with Jodie, because there was obviously going to be backlash. There was obviously going to be controversy about changing the gender. There was obviously going to be all this sort of stuff. And there was obviously going to be people who are just going to switch off just because it's a woman. And, if they're going to, then they're going to. Whatever, you've lost them anyway. But the people who are unsure, or the people who wanted to give it a chance, after watching that series, I think a lot of people would have felt disappointed. I know I did, because I was just sort of like, I wanted to be proven wrong. I wanted to, I love Capaldi so much. There's this new person coming in. I want to see what they do, and I want to be proven wrong. And I just wasn't. And it just got to a point where I was like, I'm just sick of watching crap series of television just because it's got Doctor Who's name on it. Like, there's plenty of other Doctor Who out there, which is unfortunate, and I imagine there's quite a few people like me. And there's obviously people who are sticking with it and hoping it gets better, such as yourself, but whether it actually does or not, who's to say?
Yeah, I guess, for me at least, like, in a sense, I'd like to stop watching, but I just can't, unfortunately. It is weird, it's almost like an addiction where it's like, oh, I'll just watch the next series. Oh, I want to stop watching after that. No, I'll just watch the next series, and it's just like a vicious cycle. Unfortunately, I think Stu Bagwell said something where he feels like he's just like in an abusive relationship with this TV show, whereas he knows that it's just going to keep disappointing him, but he just can't turn it off, and he's just kind of accepted that he'll just never be able to stop watching Doctor Who. And I'm kind of the same, but I think that, going back to Jodie, that it almost felt to me that she was written by someone who wanted to write her like Tennant or Smith, but really kind of didn't understand why those doctors work, which is the kind of complexities of those doctors. Like, I think if Matt Smith was just like a happy-go-lucky, quirky doctor all the time, he'd be very irritating. But I think it's kind of like the fact that on an instant he can switch to being serious and that kind of old man in a young man's body kind of thing that I think makes his doctor so great. But with Jodie, it did feel to me like they were trying to write her like Tennant or Smith, but by someone who hasn't actually watched the show.
It's kind of, to me, it comes across as someone who has kind of watched like the clips that they upload on the official channel and have seen some of the GIFs that people post on Twitter, and it's just like, all right, okay, that must be what that doctor's like, and it's just, it's not even close. Like, there's so many stories of all the doctors really where they are totally different. Not because like of bad writing, but because their character, like, there's new layers to them and there's new dimensions to them. Like McCoy's Doctor is a prime example. Like the season 24 Doctor, 7th Doctor, is not the same as the season 26 one in terms of how they're portrayed, but they both meet in the middle kind of thing. But there's no influence of, well, I mean, there is influence. I think Troughton pretty much influenced every other Doctor that followed him, but they all added their own personality into it, and I never found that Jodie did.
No.
It just did come across as like, well, David Tennant is my friend from Broadchurch, and he was really good at it. Matt Smith, he was quite good at it, so let's just do that. And it's just like, I don't know if it is her or the writing or a mixture of both, whatever it is, but I agree. I think there was a point where it was just like, you are just copying them poorly.
And I think I heard somewhere that apparently Series 11 was kind of written with a generic Doctor in mind, because a lot of it was written before Jodie was cast, I think, which is kind of explains a lot in the sense that she feels like if someone was to say, write a generic Doctor, someone would just probably write that, but it lacks any of the depth that any Doctors had before, which I guess kind of explains why she's so poorly written in Series 11. But yeah, I think that where was I going with this? I had something in my head I was going to say. I've just completely forgotten it. Oh, I remember now. So I think that I saw that apparently Jodie Whittaker was actively discouraged by Chibnall to not watch older stories to try and form her Doctor. And as Jodie wasn't someone who had like regularly watched the show before, to be discouraged from watching older stories would kind of give her the impression that, oh, I'll just play the Doctor that in my head I know what the Doctor is, which is that very quirky Smith or Tennant thing, because that's kind of the public perception of what the Doctor is. But you look at someone like Matt Smith, who also hadn't really watched the show before, but to form his Doctor, he watched a load of old stories and kind of fell in love with Troughton and Tomb of the Cybermen, which really kind of formed his Doctor. And I think if you look at those two instances, you can really look at kind of the differences. Someone who, both actors who hadn't really watched the show, but someone who watched older stories and really got a grasp of where they were to take the Doctor, and someone who was actively discouraged of watching older stories, so they kind of had to play the Doctor on what they thought it was rather than what they knew it was.
It's kind of ironic, really, because it's had the opposite effect. Like with Matt Smith, yes, he did watch Troughton and whatnot, and you can see the influences of Patrick Troughton in Matt's performance, but it's not where it's like he's copying Troughton. He's clearly his own personality. Whereas with Jodie, it's like, right, well, I don't want you watching other stuff, because if you do, you might end up like getting too influenced by him. But she did anyway. She's clearly been influenced by Tennant and Smith anyway. So maybe, I don't know. I really think that whoever plays the Doctor needs to have something about their personality. And it's like, I've seen her in interviews and stuff. It's not like she hasn't got a personality. Like, she is a quirky sort of person. And someone just needed to nudge her away from that a little bit and more into the darker stuff and give her a bit of an edge, because even in the classic era, like, a lot of people don't seem to realise that in the classic era, a lot of the time the Doctor can be that sort of stern, steely-eyed person. Like Pyramids of Mars is a prime example. Like, Tom Baker's Doctor in that is not really the light-hearted, jovial, would you like a jelly baby type character that people would stereotype him as. He's very broody and dark in that story because of the gravity of the situation that's going on. And I suppose when you have a Doctor who is so sort of like, ha, this'll be fun, everyone thinks, oh, well, this'll be fun then. And then there's no stakes. And then there's no emotion. So if anything does happen, nobody will care. So it's kind of a vicious circle, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that obviously we've both watched Series 5 recently, and yeah, like, by the end of Series 5, at least for me, I kind of, like, forgot that it was Matt Smith's first series, because it kind of felt like he'd been the Doctor for ages.
Yeah, he does just fall into it, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's how well they'd formed that Doctor, whereas at the end of Series 11, it feels like you still barely know Jodie's Doctor, and you don't really have an idea of who she is. And yeah, I think that's definitely a problem, and it is slightly improved upon in Series 12, but even still, it is a bit inconsistent, whereas in some episodes she'll be like a kind of more darker, complex Doctor, and in the next episode she's all happy one-note Series 11 Doctor, and it wasn't like a arc or character progression threaded throughout the series. It was more of, in certain episodes she's like this, and in certain episodes she's just like the Series 11 Doctor. And it wasn't, like, consistently dark, but I did appreciate the kind of efforts to try and make her Doctor more complex. It was something I was crying out for, is why I didn't connect her in Series 11. So I do appreciate that, but I think they need to take it further, and they need to just get a vision of where you want to take this Doctor, because if you go into a Doctor without a vision of where you want to take this Doctor and just kind of wing it, I don't think it's going to work. Like, I think there's an interview with Jodie and Chibnall talking about it, and Jodie says, well, what really makes my Doctor is what's on the page. Like, Chris's writing is what really formed this Doctor. And then right next to her, Chris Chibnall is saying, oh yeah, what really makes this Doctor, it's all Jodie, it's all in the performance, it's not in the writing, it's all in the performance. It's like, clearly there's such a misunderstanding there of what makes the Doctor. Yeah, it's a mess, and I think that they're going in the right direction, but as I said, first impressions are everything, and you need to kind of get it right straight away, and I think that's even happened in the classic series. Like, I think with Sylvester McCoy
it happened with,
because he wasn't, like, fully formed straight away, people kind of turned away from his Doctor, and even in public, like, perception, like, my dad was saying, like, in his head, he just remembers Sylvester McCoy being, like, a clown, and obviously that's not what he ends up being. He ends up being a really dark, manipulative Doctor, but because in his first series, he's just like a clown who plays the spoons and does pratfalls and rolls his R's, that's what everyone thought he was, and unfortunately with the public, they're not going to invest a lot of time into a show. If it doesn't hook them straight away, then they're not going to continue watching it.
Well, that's the thing, because kind of going into what I was saying before about how the new series is kind of emulating the classic era, with McCoy, they had a plan for him, and it's like, right, well, we're gonna stretch this out over, like the Cartmel master plan, we'll stretch this out over these years, and then obviously they got cancelled. And it seems like a similar thing is happening with Jodie, because it's like everyone knows now what to expect from the Doctor, kind of. Like, we've seen multiple different actors play it before, you know, McCoy and Jodie took over and whatnot. And it's like, if you don't hit the ground running, then people aren't going to stick around. Like, Chibnall supposedly got this 5-year plan. How many people are going to be there to see it all the way through? I don't think it's going to be that many, because if we keep getting series that people just don't seem to like or find boring, or because that's the one thing that Doctor Who should never be. It can be terrible. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. Objectively speaking, Doctor Who is good because it's quite rubbish. But when it's boring, I can't accept that. You've literally got a sandbox full of infinite possibilities, and if you make that boring, then you failed. And that's what the big problem with Series 11 was. So you know, you really need to have a Doctor who straight away connects with people, and when they do go through that character journey, you care about it. Like, even if Jodie does end up, you know, as popular as McCoy does nowadays, because people look back and go, well, actually, the development that he got was incredible, but he just started off a bit badly.
Yeah.
if the same thing happens with Jodie, then they failed again, because it's like, why don't you just start off with a character that people care about, people are invested in, and they grow with that character, as opposed to having a blank slate, this sort of cosplay-like Doctor who just sort of says the right things and does the right things, but doesn't really have any depth, and then they just add depth to it. Like, none of the other Doctors really, I mean, possibly McCoy, had that. I mean, even Colin, like, he started off in quite a controversial way with strangling Perry and being a bit of a bastard, but eventually his Doctor warms up, and that, whether or not the story arc was right or wrong, or if it worked or not, well, I mean, I do think it did work, because he did lighten up and he did become more likeable. But at least they had a direction, whereas now it does seem sort of aimless, which is a shame, really, because I don't think Doctor Who should be. I think it should be. I mean, we'll all probably look stupid in a few years when, like, the 5-year plan is out and everyone's just like, see, you didn't see that coming, did you? But I just don't have the faith that that's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. This whole 5-year plan thing, it kind of reminds me of, like, the Amazing Spider-Man film series, where they're like, oh, we've got so many things we want to do with this series, so many films, but because people didn't really gravitate to the first two, it just never happened. And it's the same with McCoy, that they had all these grand things they wanted to do with this Doctor, but because, people didn't really like it initially, they didn't get to do what they wanted to do, and I think a 5-year plan is actually quite a dangerous thing to do, because if people aren't going to wait around to see where it's going if they don't feel infused straight away. And I think that's a problem with Colin. Like, his arc was to peel back the layers gradually, but because everyone thought he was an asshole straight away, people didn't stick around to see the kind of progression of his arc. And I think the thing is with a Doctor is that I don't think it really works to have, like, a really big character arc, because people won't stick around for it. People want to get a good first impression with that Doctor and see whether they like that Doctor or not. And it's only really fans that will probably say, well, I'll, maybe stick around and see if it gets better or whatever, but the public aren't. If they watch Series 11 and not like it, they're not going to say, well, I'll tune into Series 12, see if it gets any better. They're just not going to care.
No, that's it. Because it's like, the thing is now, there's so much television and there's so many movies and there's just so much everything else that people will just be like, well, why am I still sticking with this if it's not getting better? I'll just go and check something else out. I'll see what's on Amazon. I'll go and see what's on Netflix, what's coming out in the cinema, all this sort of stuff. Again, it does kind of come back into what I was saying before about how, like, Doctor Who used to be the innovator, whereas now it's fallen behind and there's other stuff, I mean, it's a similar sort of thing is happening with superheroes, because it's like, well, the MCU is this big popular thing and whatnot, but there's other stuff as well now, that because I think after Endgame, I think people are going to naturally switch off because of the departures of Iron Man and Captain America and whatnot. But you go on Amazon, well, The Boys is on there, which is a superhero thing, but it's totally different and it's totally fresh, and it'll give you that superhero kick, but it's got something else about it. I think something else is going to come along. I don't know what it is, where it's going to be, in what form or whatever, but something is going to come along that is Doctor Who-esque, that people will just gravitate to instead of Doctor Who. It's inevitable.
Yeah, I guess so. I think that, I just think, as I said, that it just pays. You need to have a good impression. I just don't think Jodie's Doctor or this era have really made a good first impression. And like we say, it's not just this era, it's happened in the past with Colin and McCoy and even Capaldi, I think, because his Doctor and that series. I mean, I know you said you liked Series 8, I'm not really a big fan of it at all, but I feel like because that didn't really capture people kind of were turned off and kind of didn't really continue to see Capaldi get better. And I think that's the problem, that no matter how good your series might end up being, if it didn't get a good first impression, no one's going to be around to see it.
Yeah, that's it. Because I don't think audiences, like I say, they don't have that attention span now. No. They literally will not stick around, and there's no reason for them to either. Like, there is literally no point. That, like I say, there is so much stuff out there that there is something else. So go and find that instead. Like, there's various, because I think over lockdown, I think most people have been binge watching Netflix and Amazon and every other thing that they can get their hands on. Yeah. And there's been a few series that we've started and we just haven't stuck with them, and we've just moved on to something else, and we've not come back to them. And again, it's bound to happen with anything. Just because Doctor Who is this big brand doesn't mean it won't happen to that as well.
Yeah, very true. You're absolutely right. And yeah, it is just unfortunate, I guess, but it really just shows that, especially in the current landscape of television, you just need to know straight away. And yeah, for me, I just think it's really strange how Series 11 wasn't brilliant, because when was Chibnall was announced, like in 2016, you're taking over, so he's had a number of years to kind of plan out what he would do with this series. Like, I imagine, like, even us fans kind of in our head know what we would do if we were offered, like, the job of showrunner. So if you're
I know exactly what I'd do. That's the thing. I know. So I mean, I won't say, because I might do it as a fan film or an audio or something or whatnot. But I've had so many ideas of Doctor Who stories. Yeah. Whether or not they'd be any good, I don't know. But straight away, I'd know what to do. But it doesn't feel like Chibnall did.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels weird to me, because if you're like a writer who's written a lot of Doctor Who, and you're in and around like Moffat and Rusty Davies, surely in your head you'd think, this is what I would do if I was showrunner. And he probably would have had an idea in his head while he was like writing like Series 7 or whatever. So then when he gets offered the job in like 2016, he's announced, not only as he should have kind of an idea in his head of what he wants to do, he then has like 3 years to properly plan out his first series. That I think there's a reason why both Series 1 and Series 5 are so good and one of the best series of that respective showrunner, because they had so much longer than every other series to kind of plan out what they wanted to do with it and where it was going to go. And yeah, like with Series 5, Moffat had ages to kind of pinpoint what he wanted to do with this series, whereas with Series 6 he didn't have as long. So that's probably why Series 5 is so good. But then you'd expect a similar thing with Chibnall, because he's had so long to plan it. But Series 11 just feels like he's just winged it. Like, he's got in a few months before it's due to be filmed and has kind of found a load of scripts. He's just, just do this. It doesn't feel like he's properly planned this out. And yeah, whether he has, I mean, he probably has, but you don't get that on screen. It just feels like, yeah, he's just winged it. And that's kind of
pretty much. I mean, like we've been saying, first impressions are crucial, and you would have thought that if you were taking over, and again, like I keep coming back to, like, swapping the gender of the Doctor, it's always going to be a big deal. So do something with it. Make it an important part of the character, but it hasn't been, really. And in a way, initially I did kind of kick back about it and think, like, no, it should just be irrelevant. Don't talk about the gender and whatnot, because it's not relevant to the Doctor's character. It never has been. But the difference is, it never was before. Now it is, because men and women experience things in totally different ways, and there could have been an interesting dynamic with that, but I just don't feel like they've done anything with it. And it's a shame, really, because this was the perfect opportunity to do actually something fresh. Like, we had how many years of Moffat? Like
7.
Yeah, something like that. So do something fresh, do something different. But like we sort of said at the start of this, like, they've just been falling into the same pitfalls of the Moffat era 2 years in.
Yes, ridiculous. Yeah. And it is a shame that it feels, as I said before, that it's just a vicious cycle, and that it's just falling into the same pitfalls of the Moffat era, despite the fact that it's a completely different production team. So is it always going to be like this? Are we never going to get back to Doctor Who before the kind of Moffat lost his head? Yeah, I honestly don't know. It is a shame, as we said, and hopefully it gets better. I'm kind of optimistic for the future, because in Series 12, despite there were a lot of things in it that I wasn't really a big fan of, there were certainly things that were improved upon. Like, I think the average quality of stories was a lot better than Series 11. I think Jodie herself was better. I think the villains were better. So I think that Chibnall's taken on board some criticism from Series 11, and hopefully does the same for Series 12 and makes Series 13 even better. So I'm kind of optimistic for that, but as you said, I get, first impressions are everything, and unfortunately, even if Chris Chibnall does do good in Series 13, half the audience has already switched off by that point.
Pretty much. But, I mean, unfortunately for Chris Chibnall, but luckily for Doctor Who fans, the amazing thing about Doctor Who is that as a thing, it is like the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside. So, like when I was growing up, it was like, oh, there's this show with Christopher Eccleston, now he's suddenly David Tennant. Oh, wait, there's actually like 26 other seasons of it. Sweet. Oh, there's also a movie. Oh, wow, awesome. Oh, there's 2 other movies with Peter Cushing in the 60s that are remakes of the first Dalek stories. Wow, that's amazing. Oh, there's all these books as well, featuring, various different doctors. And, oh, wait, there's this audio company that are doing all these different audio plays, and they brought back, like, Peter Davison and Colin Baker and Paul McGann and Sylvester and eventually Tom and all this sort of stuff. So there's so much Doctor Who out there that I feel that it's gotten to a point where even if nobody really cares about what's going on television at the minute, it doesn't really matter. Like, I think Doctor Who is so big as a franchise now, physically, that whatever happens on the new series, it doesn't matter, because if someone listening to this now has sort of just been watching the new era and is just like, I don't really like it anymore, go and check out the classics, go and check out Big Finish, go and check out the books. Like, there's so much that it won't make a difference really to the average fan, but it's the casual viewer that I think is going to be the biggest casualty, because from what I've heard, Series 12 was quite complex compared to some of the others. Not necessarily like Series 6 level, but some of the stuff where it's like, I have no idea what's going on if you're a general viewer.
Absolutely.
So I imagine that would turn people off. So, it's all personal preference really, but like I say, if people aren't enjoying it, there's plenty more Doctor Who in the sea or in space.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's so much Doctor Who. You raised an interesting point about Series 12 being quite complex, because it's so weird that you have Series 11, which is like no returning monsters, no multi-part stories, just back to basics, Doctor Who, like perfect for newcomers. And then Series 12 is, well, we've brought back the Master, we brought back the Cybermen, we've brought back the Jadoon, we're introducing another Doctor. We're going back to Gallifrey, we're going into the Matrix and the Panopticon, and we've got a whole new set of regenerations before Hartnell, and the Doctor who was the Doctor before the Doctor, and the Time Lords wipe the memory, and the Doctor is the key for regeneration. And if you're a casual fan, you're like, you don't know what the hell is going on.
I am a fan, and that sounds complex to me.
And it's just like you have been switched off. I think it's so weird that Series 11 and Series 12 are like completely different. Like, you wouldn't think they would have been written by the same person, because Series 11 is so like purposely uncomplex, and like the series that's the most disconnected from anything that had come previous. Yet Series 12 is so obsessed with like lore and the past and changing that past, and the whole final episode is essentially just the Master reading off the Doctor's new Wikipedia page. So
and that is another thing that I think will turn a lot of people off, because it's like, if you'd have sat here now and said to me like, oh, do you know what, every single episode of Series 12 is amazing, like I'm not shitting you at all, it is one of the best series ever. However, this happens, like the stuff with the Timeless Child, I still wouldn't watch it. I absolutely loathe that idea. And I can't remember who it was, because it was a while ago now on Twitter, but I shared a video that Full Fat Videos did talking about the Timeless Child stuff, and I watched it because I was like, what actually did they do? And I watched that video, and they were sort of explaining what happened, and they were saying why they didn't like it, and I agreed with every point, and someone was just like, yeah, but you haven't seen it, so you can't really comment. And it's just like, but I don't have to put a turd on 2 slices of bread to know not to eat it. Like, I don't have to eat it to know it's a bad idea, do you know what I mean? So I just couldn't get on board with that. And I mean, the plot thread the plot hole in it straight away for me is, right, so we as a society are based off of this one creature that we have tortured, and our lives and everything about us is going to be built off of this child, like regeneration. This is our fountain of youth, essentially. This is the one being that if we need to regenerate, we can get the source of it from here. Let's just let it go travel around the universe in mortal danger constantly. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it is. It's messed up, and it kind of contradicts the first Doctor's arc, because obviously his arc is going from a bit of an asshole, and then the more he interacts with humans and travels with his companions, he becomes softer and lighter and becomes the Doctor we know and love by the end of his era. But if the Doctor was already the Doctor before that arc is pretty much pointless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you that even if Series 12 was the most amazing thing, that with that in it, no one's going to watch it, and I couldn't entice anyone to watch it because, yeah, as I was saying to you, I think that, well, Series 12 is not perfect. It improves on a lot of things that I personally felt were bad about Series 11. Like, the Doctor's more improved, the episode quality's more improved, the villains are improved, but then because it ends with the Timeless Child reveal, I genuinely don't think I could actually recommend Series 12 to anyone just because of that. And it really irritates me. Whereas my whole family kind of sat down to watch Series 11, it was only really me and my dad and my mum kind of who were watching Series 12. My sister, who got into Doctor Who the same time as me around Series 6, just didn't want to watch it. And I kind of said to her, no, sit down, it's got better, watch it. And then she watched the Timeless Children. I was just like, fair enough. Like, it's just really irritating. Because there was another episode, it's even disconnected from the arc. It's called Can You Hear Me? And it looked really good in the trailers. I was just like, come on, sit down, watch this one. This one's going to be really good. And it ended up being one of the weakest episodes in the series. I was just like, oh, for God's sake. I'm never going to get them to watch it now. But yeah, that's really irritating that no matter how good a series is, I can't recommend it because it ends in that. Because the Timeless Children exists, I don't know if I could genuinely recommend Series 12 because of that. Because, yeah, I remember that obviously because you weren't watching Series 12 and I saw your tweets and I was kind of thinking, I hope that he gives it a go and that he watches it and thinks, yeah, it's better. And then I watch The Timeless Children. There's no hope for getting someone like you back on board now. Because it's annoying. It's almost like, it's like one step forward but two steps back at the same time. Like, he improved it, but then he did something that was just worse than anything in Series 11. So, it's very strange, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess, but yeah, it is a bit of a shame.
The frustrating thing for me is because I've heard the idea of the Timeless Child, like this being from a different dimension that is the source of all regeneration and whatnot. That idea, I actually quite like, because the Time Lords are bastards. They would do something like that. Making it the Doctor is the worst possible thing you could have done to that idea.
Absolutely.
And I don't know why. Like, surely Chibnall would have known that wasn't the best of ideas. And it's like, why are they bringing stuff like Brain and Morbius into it? Because the thing is, like, I've seen Brain and Morbius a number of different times.
Yeah.
Because I know someone who hasn't seen Brain and Morbius from a mile away, because they will say, well, actually, in the Brain and Morbius, they showed previous incarnations of the Doctor. Okay, so the behind-the-scenes reason was that was the implication. It's never explicitly stated on screen. The majority of fans said they're probably incarnations of Morbius. And if it wasn't, we just ignore it and pretend that they are anyway. In the same vein that the Doctor's also half human.
Yeah,
but we ignored that he ever said that in the movie as well.
Yeah.
Like, with this, though, I don't think this is something that we can just ignore. It's got to be retconned in some way, shape, or form. I mean, listen, this is just me saying that as someone who hates it. There's obviously going to be people out there who think, actually, that's a fresh take. That's a different idea. That's quite good. All the power to you.
Yeah.
But you're wrong. I just can't get behind it. I mean, the thing is, with the Time Lords, I think post-war games, probably, they've not been the same anyway. Like,
I'd agree.
The war games, they seemed like really mysterious and powerful. And since then, we've sort of opened the door on the Time Lords a little bit, and it just
when they're kind of completely different and they're not powerful at all. And I like the Deadly Assassin, but they're easily the best part of that story.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. And there's various other stories as well. Like Invasion of Time is exactly the same. Again, a story that I like, but the Time Lords are not handled well. And same when they appear in the 80s. But the idea of like this being, like I say, is such a good idea. But it was like, and I think it could have added more to the Time Lords as well. Like, the foundation of their society is based off of cruelty and torture, when the Doctor's whole thing is never be cruel, never be cowardly. And was the Doctor right to save the Time Lords in the Time War and save Gallifrey? And, you know, what does this mean for the Doctor? All this sort of stuff. Or maybe the Doctor was involved and lost her memory about what actually happened. There's so many interesting directions you could have taken it, but Chibnall went with what I think is the most boring, obvious, controversial one, just because it's a shame, because I've heard fan theories of people saying, oh, what if it was the Master? That would explain a fair amount. It's not perfect, but it makes more sense than it being the Doctor. But we'll just have to see. Maybe it is a ploy, maybe it is a trick. I don't care anyway, I'm not watching, but it's just, when I heard it, it annoyed me, even though I'm not watching it anymore, because it made me look at someone like William Hartnell, who admittedly isn't my favourite Doctor, but for me, that is the first incarnation. There wasn't a version of the Doctor before that. So for all of a sudden to be these other Doctors out of nowhere, then it's annoying. And it's like people often say, oh, but what about the War Doctor? He just came from nowhere. But there was a slot where he fits in, and it adds something. It's not perfect, you know, he is essentially a stand-in for Christopher Eccleston. But that Doctor has so much character and weight behind it, and like I say, there is a place where you can fit him in. There was periods of time where we didn't see the Doctor. We didn't see Christopher Eccleston regenerate from Paul McGann. So there is endless amounts of stories you could have told there. And I guess people can make the argument, well, there was loads of stories before we even saw the Doctor. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But to add this new Doctor all of a sudden, and all these other Doctors all of a sudden, it just feels unjustified and unwarranted. Like, I mean, I've heard that this Ruth Doctor is apparently really, really good. And if that's the case, fantastic. But she's never going to get a series, is she? Let's face it. Like, she's never going to have her own spin-off, because Paul McGann didn't get his own TV series. So if a Doctor who has appeared in his own full adventure doesn't get his own spin-off, then why would this Doctor? You know, and all these other previous incarnations, we're never going to see them anyway. So what's the point in adding them? You know? I mean, obviously Paul McGann's got the audio stuff, and I imagine Big Finisher knocking on the door to Joe Martin saying, like, hey, do you want to do a bit of a Doctor Who series for us? That'll be $24.99. Yeah. But yeah, it's a shame, really. But like I say, it is what it is. And if it works in the future, if they explain it better, I don't know. But just have to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the problem is that, as I said, the Doctor before the Doctor was the Doctor isn't interesting. But we see William Hartnell steal the TARDIS in Name of the Doctor, and we see the arc that William Hartnell goes through. I don't care about the Doctor before the Doctor became the Doctor, because that character isn't the Doctor. If you know what I mean, like...
Yeah.
A Doctor before the Doctor was turned back into a child and memories erased isn't the Doctor to me.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, so there was...
The Doctor was turned back into a child?
Yeah, so the Doctor was a child who fell out of the portal, regenerated a load of times, worked for the Time Lords, regeneration was harnessed and given to the Time Lords, went for a load of regenerations, and then had their memory wiped, turned back into a child, and then lived the life on Gallifrey in the Academy of the Master that we know. So it's essentially just a whole other life before the Doctor as we knew, which is...
That's totally pointless.
It is pointless. It adds nothing. It adds absolutely nothing. I just don't understand it. And as you said, the most interesting thing about the Timeless Child isn't that it's the Doctor. Like, that is the least interesting direction you could go with. Like, I think Full Fat Videos said something about how if the Doctor knew that regeneration wasn't her birthright, how would she feel about regenerating next time she has to? Because technically she shouldn't have that ability. And I put out a video, I think, called Fixing the Timeless Child or something like that. And kind of what I thought is, because I don't know if you knew, but the Master destroyed Gallifrey.
Yeah, I did know that.
Yeah. What I'm going to explain now sounds really fanficky. It makes more sense in my video. I'm kind of saying the abridged version here, but the Doctor finds her way into a parallel universe, and Gallifrey is still there. And she thinks, well, Gallifrey's destroyed in our universe, I'm not going to let that happen again. But then she finds out that the Timeless Child was kind of manipulated by Gallifrey, and Gallifrey essentially his history is steeped in child torture. And then she probably think, well, should I save Gallifrey now? Is it right that the Master destroyed it? And all this kind of stuff. I think there's so many interesting things you could do with it without it being the Doctor, and it being the Doctor is the least interesting thing you could do with it. I almost feel like Chris Chibnall created a thing and he didn't actually realise how much potential there actually was with this idea. He only created it because he wanted an altered backstory for the Doctor. He didn't actually realise how much story potential this would have if it wasn't the Doctor.
So wait, did the Master destroy Gallifrey because the Timeless Child is the Doctor?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that?
Apparently it's because the Master now knows that there's a part of the Doctor in him, and he's not happy about that, so he just destroys Gallifrey. It's not explained how he destroyed Gallifrey at all. That's just swept aside. But yeah, that's his whole reasoning for it.
That doesn't seem like the Master, and it also doesn't seem justified. Like, I know that the Doctor and the Master have this like love-hate relationship, but there's a mutual respect there. Like, the Master does care. It's kind of like a Sherlock Moriarty, Joker, Batman type thing. Like, they don't necessarily like each other, but they need each other.
Yes.
And it's like if you go and watch like the Pertwee era, for example, and the stuff with Delgado, the Sea Devils, for example. There's some beautiful scenes between the Doctor and the Master. The Mind of Evil as well is another one where they just have such utter respect for one another. There's not like this burning hatred for one another. It's not like they're opposite sides of the same coin. It's not like they're standing on, one's on this side, one's on the other. They meet in the middle a lot of the time. So that doesn't make sense to me. And again, that's sort of like a fundamental misunderstanding of the Master.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that obviously, I think something that Full Fat Video said as well is, like, what if the Doctor and the Master actually found common ground in the fact that they were appalled that Gallifrey did this? But
which they probably would, to be
exactly.
fair.
But yeah, it doesn't really happen. It doesn't really come together, and yeah, it's just a mess of a story essentially. And I don't know if it's going to get retconned or if the next showrunner is just kind of just brush it under the carpet like Chibnall did with the Doctor saying he left Gallifrey because of the hybrid, or what Russell did after the TV movie said he was half human. I imagine that's kind of what will happen, is just the next showrunner will just brush it under the carpet. Like the kind of same thing with the TV movie. Like, the TV movie is canon, but what's said about him being half human isn't. Like, I imagine Series 12 will still be canon, but the Timeless Child just won't be. And even though that doesn't make sense, I just imagine that'll just what will happen. I can't imagine the Timeless Child will just become something that in fan lore that every showrunner is just going to take on board. I imagine showrunners is just going to try and get you to forget about it, because that's not really where they will go with the character.
Yeah, well, like I said before, like, Doctor Who's so big, and you as the viewer, you can make your own headcanon, so you can pick and choose what you want. So for some people, I mean, there's people that I know that are just like, yeah, after Hartnell it went downhill, like as early as Hartnell. Like, so you can pick and choose what you want. Like, for me personally, like, I'm never going to include the Timeless Child into, if someone said to me, so what's the Doctor's thing again? What's the Doctor about? I thought, well, he's Time Lord of Planet Gallifrey ran away because he was bored and fed up. That's what I would say. I would never go into this Timeless Child stuff. I would never say the Doctor's half human. I mean, the Time War stuff I quite like as well. I think that's something new and different and adds to the character, but I can understand why people don't like that. And, there's certain stuff in certain eras that people just don't like. Like, for example, the Leisure Hive exists. I hate it. So when I watch the Tom Baker era, I skip right past it, and it doesn't make a difference. So it's people can pick and choose what they want. And I mean, the thing that gets me is when people say, well, there's no such thing as canon. Well, there is.
Yeah,
there absolutely is.
People say canon doesn't matter, and it's like, for me, it feels so weird that Series 12 is a series that says canon doesn't matter while simultaneously being obsessed with canon. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it. You either don't care about canon or you really like canon. Like, Chris Chibnall is saying canon doesn't matter by rewriting it, but the reason he's rewriting it and feels the need to rewrite it is because he himself is just obsessed with canon. I don't know.
Because I just imagine if people are just like, yep, canon does not matter. Okay, well, in the next episode, the TARDIS is going to be no longer a police box. It's now going to be a fridge. I guarantee people, these same people who are like, canon doesn't matter, just be like, no, well, you can't do that. Well, canon doesn't matter, so I can. Oh, and by the way, the Doctor's now erased from existence, and the show is now about... Who's rubbish? Mel. The show is now it's about Mel, who travels around, like, she's brought back from the 80s. She's travelling around in a fridge. I'm basically describing, like, Hellbent, really, aren't I? Like, with Clara in the cafe. That's Doctor Who now. Doctor Who is now Clara and me travelling around in a cafe. That's what Doctor Who is now. And people are just like, no, it isn't. Well, canon doesn't matter, so it is. And Clara can now regenerate as well, because she's also the Timeless Child. She's the brother of the Timeless Child, or whatever, and has had a secret life of her own. Like, canon doesn't matter. Let's do it. Like, oh, K9 is now a cat. Kit 10. That's what it is, like kitten. So there we go. Fixed it. Canon don't matter.
Yeah.
And also, Peter Davison's Doctor is erased. Why? Because canon doesn't exist. Yeah. Let's just get rid of him. Caves of Anjazani, Earthshock, who cares? Get rid of him.
Yeah. What irritates me the most is when people say the numbering of the Doctors doesn't matter. Like that.
Oh,
that irritates me when people say, well, it doesn't matter if William Hartnell isn't the first Doctor, and who cares about the numbering? It doesn't matter. And it's like, yeah, but it does. Like, I don't know. I just think that I understand if people don't necessarily feel like canon isn't too important and aren't obsessed with canon, but I think to say that canon doesn't matter and you shouldn't care about canon is just a bit of a ridiculous statement, really. And yeah, I think that's why Series 12 in The Timeless Child is so polarizing for most people, because it doesn't know what it wants. It changes everything while simultaneously changing nothing. It's obsessed with canon while simultaneously saying that canon doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't know what it wants to be, and I think that's probably why it's so polarizing to people, because it's just a mess. It's a mess on all fronts, really.
But it's like, if canon doesn't matter, why are you watching? If the lore doesn't matter and the canon doesn't, like, what do you watch it for then? Because obviously you must get invested into the story and into the world of Doctor Who and the rules of Doctor Who and whatnot. Because what is it? I hate the argument when I say something like, "Oh, I didn't like that happening in Doctor Who because that's stupid. It's not really realistic." And someone just goes, "Yeah, well, someone being from a different planet flying around in a phone box isn't realistic." And I'm like, "Yeah, in our world, but in that world, that is realistic because it happens."
It's going by the mechanics of the show, like the rules that the show have set up.
Yeah.
Is what it makes sense in.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same with like superhero stuff, where it's like in some films where, I don't know, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but like some of it's a load of rubbish and it makes no sense. And people are just like, yeah, well, you know, someone having spider powers and climbing up walls isn't realistic, but it is in this universe.
Yeah.
That's why I watch it, because obviously that's not going to happen in my universe. It's not going to happen in the real world. I mean, it might do. We never know. Who's to say? I could be Spider-Man right now. With a TARDIS, who's to say?
No,
Lockdown is really getting to me. But the point is, like, these things, they do matter to people. They are important, and it's like, if they don't matter, then why are you watching? Yeah. Like, it's just a stupid argument, really.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right, and yeah, I think that if there's any plot holes, it's like in the next Doctor, where there's like that massive Cyber King stomping over London, and it's like, A, how did they build that? B, how did they get it into the Thames? C, what is even the point of that anyway? Because the Cybermen want to convert people. Why are they just stomping over London? What does that even do? Like, that makes no sense. And then someone could say, well, a man with two hearts, or a man or a woman now, with two hearts in a police box roaming around time and space doesn't make any sense. So surely that doesn't make any sense. Surely that's okay. And it's like, no, it isn't. Because there's a difference between kind of like suspending your disbelief because of the rules of the show and just flat out plot holes.
Yeah, you end up breaking the show otherwise, because if you say, well, everything's okay, well, it's like, well, no, not everything's okay, because then you take away from the tension and because obviously it's inevitable that characters in Doctor Who are going to die or get hurt, or for whatever reason they're just going to leave. I hate when Moffat kept doing that thing of, we'll just bring them back.
Yeah.
That breaks the rules. Because it's like, well, I can't cross my own time stream. This is a fixed point in time. However, because you're my friend and I like you, I'm going to go and save you. And then it's just like, well, what about Adric then? Well, he just died, did he? That was a bit mean.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, the Doctor Who community is I hate Twitter. I loathe Twitter. It's just a cesspit of shit, basically. Especially like with Doctor Who opinions and stuff, where people are just like, oh, this is amazing, but that's rubbish, and this is amazing, and you're horrible, and just does my head in. I'm probably going to delete Twitter thinking about it. It's that bad, but I can't. It's one of them. I'm addicted to Twitter.
Yeah. I get you. I think that, as you say, that I think that the thing is that Doctor Who, yes, it's a show about nonsense most of the time, and its rules are just outlandish, but you still need to adhere to those rules. It's like what we were saying about that Moffat and the Daleks and the Cybermen, like, yes, Daleks not wanting to kill other Daleks is an okay idea, but it doesn't make sense when Daleks have had a long history of killing other Daleks. Like, you still need to adhere to your own rules. Like, just because Doctor Who is like a sandbox for doing anything at all doesn't mean you can break your own rules, because then your show is essentially broken at that point.
Yeah, because I mean, there's got to be consequences, and there's got to be. Cause like I say, it's the emotional stakes of stuff, isn't it? Like, you can't just expect everything to work out in the end, or you can't just, we've got this magic wand that fixes everything, because there's no stakes or tension. Then it's just not enjoyable. Like, I've seen it in multiple franchises before and stuff, where they've just done stuff, and it's like, why have you even like this? So, for example, the DC TV shows like Arrow, Flash, and whatnot. And with, I think it was season 3 of The Flash, where the teasing throughout the whole thing, Iris is going to die. And then at the last minute, it's like, it's a bait and switch, it's somebody else who's disguised as Iris. And it's like, that's just kill her. Like, either kill her off, or just don't tease it at all. And I think Doctor Who has had that problem. I think lots of things have had that problem. But because audiences aren't stupid. Like, they can take being upset for a bit that their favourite character's dead, or that this happened, which is terrible for the characters that they care about, or, you know, any possibilities. So it's such a shame that I think Doctor Who is now, well, not just now, has been falling into this trap for a while. I think Clara started it more than anyone, possibly, because she just kept coming back constantly, much to my annoyance.
Yeah, absolutely. Clara was just ridiculous, the amount of times she kept coming back, and the amount of times she had potential exits and then just kept coming back and back and back. Yeah, you just got sick of her by the end. You're just like, just leave. And I think that's the problem. And I think that you mentioned an interesting point about the Flash and Iris, and you're just like, oh, that's a cop-out. And I say it's kind of, that kind of, for me, felt like a similar thing to like Series 6, where they're building up the Doctor's gonna die, and then psych, he's not dead. And I think that a lot of people will say, well, if you complain about the ending of the Wing of Fear song, people say, what, did you expect he was going to die? And it was like, no, it's not. For me, it's not the fact that the Doctor was a Tesselector on the beach that is the problem. It's the fact that the whole episode was building up to the Doctor accepting his death. And then at the end, he's like, right, yeah, I do have to die. But then all of a sudden, he's like, psych, actually, no, I'm not going to die. I'm going to build myself into a Tesselector and do a massive fake out. And it's not the fact that the Doctor faked his death. It's the fact that you were building an arc around the Doctor accepting his death, only to go, psych, no, he didn't actually want to accept his death at all. He actually went into a Tesselector. And I think it's obviously, plot holes and contradictions. I think they're sometimes the worst things you can really do with a show, because it just makes the audience feel like they've wasted their time. Yeah,
pretty much, because it's getting invested in something that just doesn't pay off, really, because it's not satisfying, and it's not clever or anything. Because it's like, I remember, again, going back to Arrow and Flash and stuff like that, like their seasons, they start off so well, and then they just follow this same formula, and it's like, well, you've done that before, but they're doing it in a different way, and it's like, well, I know how this is going to end, because obviously, that character's too important to be killed off, and, this character is obviously too important to be written off, so they're obviously going to come back in some sort of way, and it's just, well, we found this magic wand that fixes everything, and it's just stupid. It's really stupid. I cannot remember, apart from The Boys, I can't remember the last TV show that I watched that I was genuinely just like, yep, this is incredible from start to finish. Every other TV, The Boys hasn't even finished yet, season 2 is coming out soon, but every other series is like, it starts off so well, and then it just takes a massive nosedive. I don't know what it is about television lately, but it seems to me like there's hardly anything with a bad ending, in the sense of like, someone dies, or like it's not all happy and everyone lives happily ever after, that sort of stuff. It just doesn't. I think probably something like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, something like that. But other than them, I can't really think of anything. I think it's a universal problem. Maybe I'm just not watching the right shows. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe it's just because a lot of shows aren't allowed to end when they want to. They just have to keep on going on and on and on forever to a point.
Yeah, that's a point.
That everyone just doesn't care anymore, and I think that is a problem with TV in general. And I think it's the most disappointing thing is when you get invested in something and it just goes nowhere. I think that was a big problem with Series 12, is the fact that I was really invested in this Sideman story, and it goes nowhere. They're absolutely overshadowed with the Sidemen, and their big plan is revealed to be that they want to turn themselves into robots. I was just like, what? Oh my god, it was ridiculous.
Was that's actually a thing?
Yeah, that is a thing.
Because I know bits, but I didn't know everything. I was like, they wanted to turn themselves into robots.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Why?
And this is only revealed in the last episode, so you've got 2 episodes with like the Sidemen, where you're like, oh, this is pretty good, and it's never really revealed what the Sideman's plan is. And in the last episode, the main guy's like, oh yeah, we want to turn ourselves into robots. And the Master says, oh, that's a rubbish plan. Why would you want to turn yourselves into robots? But just because a character points out that it's a rubbish plan doesn't make up for the fact that the Sideman's plan for 3 episodes was that they wanted to turn themselves into robots. It was ridiculous. Honestly. Yeah, I feel sorry for you that you didn't know about that, and I imagine you probably wish that you'd gone on living not knowing that was an actual plot for the Cybermen in the Doctor Who story.
To be fair, like we were saying before, I've been disappointed with the Cybermen for years now, so it doesn't really make a difference. But so hang on, what was Captain Jack got? What's he got to do with everything then? Why was he there?
Nothing really. He just pops up in one episode and says, "Oh, beware the lone Cyberman," and that's it. That's all he is in the series. He doesn't appear in the Cyberman stories at all, so I don't know how he came across this information. He's just there to randomly set something up. Yeah,
so nostalgia baiting again, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And even the Roof Doctor, like Joe Martin's Doctor, actually has no point in the series because it's not even confirmed that she's a pre-Hartnell Doctor. So, like, why is she even in there for like a few minutes in 2 episodes? Like, she technically has no reason to be there because her setup isn't even necessary. The same with Captain Jack, his setup isn't even necessary for the story to work. So, why are they there? Yeah, it's a very poorly plotted series, is Series 12, and I think it improved on certain things. I think the episodes were generally better, the Doctor was better, but as a series and as an attempt of a story arc from Chibnall, it was really poorly plotted, and the story arc is easily the worst thing about that series, and not just the finale, just generally how it's threaded throughout the series and how it's handled is terrible. And if Chris Chibnall didn't want to do a story arc in Series 11, I don't think he should have done one in Series 12, because it feels like he was just forced to do a story arc because everyone wanted him to, and it feels like, to me, it felt like it was written by someone who doesn't understand how to thread a story arc in a series, because, yeah, it was so poorly plotted.
It's coming across to me like he was given, or he wanted to use at least all these different things, but just had no idea what to do with them, because it's like, right, well, you've got Captain Jack coming back, you've got Cybermen and the Master coming back, and you've got other Doctors that we didn't know about before, and the Timeless Child, what's the mystery of Gallifrey? And it's just like, you're not doing anything with them. Yeah. And then, I mean, it's also kind of going back to what we were saying about Jodie in Series 11, where it's like, okay, so you've changed the Doctor's gender now. How is this going to impact the show? It isn't. Why do it then? Well, it's because. Which is, if anything, is more annoying, because it's like, just do something with it. That's, like I said before, Doctor Who is like this massive... Like I said before, I have got a plethora of ideas. I've literally got a notebook full of ideas of stories, like story notes and stuff. Because I did want to... I mean, I might still at some point do fan films in some way, shape or form, like maybe stop motion with action figures or audio or live action. I don't know. But I've got these ideas and I've thought about them because I've, as a fan myself, have seen various different things, kind of like the early Tom Baker years. I've seen other things and I've been inspired by them. So I'm like, oh, that would be a really good Doctor Who story. But it just seems to me like Chibnall just doesn't know what he's doing. And he's just like, oh, well, that's a Doctor Who thing, and it's weird. If someone said to me, Chris Chibnall, yeah, he's never really been a fan of Doctor Who, I'd probably believe you. Because it comes across like that.
It does. Yeah, I don't know. He's a perplexing figure, is Chibnall. I don't know what his writing style is, because Series 11 is completely different to Series 12. So... I don't know, like, even the things you'd associate with Chibnall, his character work, like, I think I said this in a previous podcast, but you even look at, like, his episodes of Life on Mars and his episodes of Torchwood, which really centre on, like, the character dynamics, and then you go into Doctor Who and his character work is non-existent, so I don't even know what kind of writer Chris Chibnall is. He actively contradicts what you'd expect from him, so... Yeah, I don't know. I honestly have no idea. I just guess we can just sit and hope that it will all come good and that his 5-year plan was actually building towards something, but at the moment, I just don't know where it's going, and I don't even know if he knows where it's going, to be honest.
Well, I think Moffat had a similar thing as well, didn't he? Where it's just like, aha, this is going to go somewhere, but it didn't.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, like I was saying before, like, there's a plethora of other stuff out there, so... Why not? I mean, I've been massively enjoying it. Like, people have said to me, oh, you should review Series 12, give it a try and whatnot. And I'm just like, you know what? This time I'm going to stick to my guns. And I was thinking about this the other day. If there was no new episodes of Doctor Who, I'd probably be alright with that. Genuinely. And I never thought I'd get to that position, but I've got all these different things, like we were mentioning before, like all these previous episodes with the classic era and the modern era and like the Big Finish stuff and the books and everything else. That's enough for me. I mean, obviously, I know people want it. I never want it to fail. I never want Doctor Who to go away because it is such a big part of my life. And I'm not going to say, like, oh, well, bleh, never mind Doctor Who, because that's a big reason why people know who I am on YouTube and why you wanted to talk to me, all this sort of stuff. So I get that, but it's just, it gets to a point where it's like, just let it go.
Yeah.
Like, for a bit. So, it is what it is. Hopefully someone... But then again, like we were saying before, how would you turn this around? Like, who would you bring in? Like, who would you cast as the Doctor? And like, who would the companions be? And who writes it? And all this sort of stuff. There's so many things that before it was fun to speculate about because it was just like, oh, they'd be pretty good and they'd play it pretty well, and like that'd be a cool companion and this would be a cool dynamic. Whereas now it's kind of like, who'd be the least shit?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it is certainly a weird time for Doctor Who, and as I said, I guess we can only hope that it gets better. But you know, who knows? Obviously, we've recorded for 2 hours now.
Is it 2 hours already?
Yeah,
Jesus,
it is, and we've covered a lot of things. But I mainly just wanted to talk to you before we wrap up. I kind of wanted to have a conversation about the Tom Baker era. Because
okay, yeah.
Over lockdown, I've kind of been marathoning the classic series, not like in chronological order, just like a couple of stories from this Doctor and then move on and then rinse and repeat. And I've watched obviously a lot more of the classic series than I had done before. And I just wanted to kind of, because I know you're a massive fan of Tom Baker, he's your favourite Doctor, and the Tom Baker era as a whole, I just kind of wanted to talk about it, because it's quite a strange era, really. People kind of usually say that the Tom Baker era is the golden years of Doctor Who, but when you watch it, it's very strange, because it's not one era at all, it's like 3 different eras.
Yeah, it is. It's weird, because again, it's kind of like with the new era, like you can distinctly feel the different producers. So there's obviously the first three, which are very clearly like Bob Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe, and then it's Graham Williams, and then it's obviously more. Well, the John Nathan Turner, like season 18, is more John Nathan Turner, and it's more Fifth Doctor, really. It's like season 18 could easily have Peter Davison in it, and it is strange. But I think the weird thing about it, because as a kid I was just like, if it's got Tom in it, I love it.
Yeah.
Now that I've sort of grown up a bit, I look back at it and I'm just sort of like, well, those first three series, they are incredible. They've got a couple of duds in there, but typically I enjoy it all the way through. Season 15, I enjoy that quite a bit, but it's not as good. Season 16, very hit and miss. Season 17, very hit and miss. Season 18, I like it for what it is, but it's not like I say, it's not a Tom Baker series. So it is a really weird era of Doctor Who. So out of curiosity, like, which stories have you seen and gravitated to the most, and is there any that you didn't like?
Well, it's quite interesting because a couple of years ago, when I was first getting into the classic series, it was very weird. I really gravitated to the back end of the Tom Baker era because I'd heard about the greatness of the early Tom Baker years. Like, everyone speaks about Genesis and Pyramids of Mars and the Deadly Assassin, and I felt like I'd already seen these stories without actually seeing them, if you know what I mean. Like, I knew so much about them. Whereas with you look at season 18 and season 17, I was browsing through season 17, and I saw episodes like The Creature from the Pit or Nightmare of Eden, and I had heard no one even mention these stories before. So that's kind of why I watched them, because I knew nothing about them. I didn't know what people thought of them, so I just kind of went in and enjoyed them. But that doesn't mean I don't like the early half. I think season 13 and 14 in particular are incredible. I think season 13 especially is just brilliant, and it has so many good stories in that season. The Seeds of Doom is one of my favourite Doctor Who stories ever. I just think it's
brilliant.
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 story for me, and season 14 is great as well. Season 12, I'd say, isn't quite as good as the other two, but I'd still think it's great. For season 12, I guess the only couple of stories that will not necessarily let it down. One story I'm really not a fan of, Revenge of the Cybermen. I know you said that you didn't really mind it in one of your videos. I think it was the ranking the Tom Baker seasons that you said you were.
Yeah.
You didn't really mind it. I can't stand Revenge of the Cybermen, I'll be honest. And
I understand why, to be honest. I didn't like it for a long time, but I rewatched it not long ago, and I was just like, yeah, it's alright, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah, I guess I just went into it, and I was expecting to like it because it's Tom Baker and the Cybermen, and I knew that it wasn't amazingly loved, but I didn't realise that it would kind of feel like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like they were really invested in writing the Cybermen, which is quite a weird thing for the classic series, because as we said earlier in the podcast, it always felt like with the classic series, they wanted to write a Cyberman story, and they always had their heart in it, and I think Revenge of the Cybermen is one of those only instances where it really feels like they wrote a Cyberman story just because they felt like they had to for name pull, and I think that's why it kind of ends up being quite weak. And I think the Sontaran experiment, again, I know you really like that one. I didn't think it was bad. It was about probably a 6 out of 10 for me. I just didn't really feel like it was amazing. It just kind of was just there, I think. But I really like Robot. I think that's actually a really underrated story, and the Ark in Space is great, and obviously Genesis is amazing. And I think season 13 and 14, there really isn't any duds in there at all. I think the only one out of those two that I'd say is not amazing is maybe Face of Evil, but even that's a 6 out of 10. That's not terrible. I think those stories are just consistently great. I think I think it's weird that also in those series I don't love the stories you'd expect. I think Seeds of Doom is my favourite Tom Baker story, but and this is going to be heresy. I know people are going to hate me for this. I'm not amazingly in love with Pyramids of Mars. I think it's a good story. It's a 7 out of 10, but I don't know, it's not quite as good as
I've heard that a lot recently.
Yeah.
I think Pyramids of Mars is I would say Pyramids of Mars is overrated. I love it, but I get what people mean. It isn't this. When people talk about pyramids, they act like it's this holy grail of Doctor Who. I don't think it is. I think it's, if we were doing like a tier list, and like tier 1 is like the best stories in Tom Baker's era, I would have stuff like Genesis in there, Seeds of Doom, City of Death, for example. I'd have Pyramids in tier 2. I wouldn't have it in tier 1.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. It is. I love it and it is brilliant, but I do feel like that is probably one of his more overrated stories, which I wouldn't often say because I think most of them deserve the sort of credit that they get. But yeah, I do kind of feel you on that one.
Yeah, it's quite interesting hearing you say that, because I think that you've obviously spoken about Pyramids of Mars quite a lot, whereas I don't think you've really mentioned stories like Seeds of Doom other than your like Tom Baker ranking video, which I think is quite interesting that you say Pyramids of Mars is a little bit overrated. I think for me it was because I've seen Pyramids of Mars twice. I watched it in 2017. It was one of the first classic stories I really saw, and I didn't really like it. And when I was rewatching it in my marathon, I thought I didn't really like it because it was one of the first classic stories I watched, so I thought I'm gonna like it more now. Now I've watched a lot more of the classic series, and I still thought it was good, but I don't know, there's just something about it that I just didn't really connect to it, and for me, I think that it's almost like a worse version of the Seeds of Doom, because they're quite similar. It's just the Doctor and Sarah Jane running around a house, being chased by things, and at least in my opinion, I think the Seeds of Doom kind of does it better. But
yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, because it's like when I did like the top 10 best and top 10 worst videos, like that was like 3 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like in that time, like those lists would probably be totally different if I was to redo them now.
Yeah.
Because I've been like rewatching stuff or seeing stuff that I'd not seen for a long time. So it's like, for example, during the lockdown, I rewatched The Mutants with John Perkley, which was a story that I was just like, I don't really care about that story. However, watching it again, I'm like, actually, that's not as bad as I thought it was. Another story was like Power of the Daleks. That was a story that I was like, I enjoy it, but I don't really get it. But then I watched it again, and I was just like, okay. It suddenly clicked with me, and I was just like, okay, this is a phenomenal story, one of the best ever. And I think I've sort of had that with some of the other stories as well. So, like I say, Pyramids of Mars, I enjoy a lot, but it's not the first Tom story I would reach for. Seeds of Doom has gone up in my estimations, I do think. It's a story I always enjoyed, but I never really thought about it. But lately I've been starting to think about it. And then there's other stuff, like Brain and Morbius, that's sort of gone lower in my estimations, whereas Planet of Evil, I still don't love, but I think is better, or better than I gave it some credit for in the past. So yeah, I think it's just time. I mean, another one for me was Caves of Androzani. That was a story that I'd heard was amazing, and it's like, this is like the holy grail of Doctor Who. And then I watched it, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I rewatched it a couple more times, and I was like, right, I get it. So it's all about time and rewatching stuff, and opinions change as people get older anyway. So like some stories that I would have loved as a kid, like Destiny of the Daleks, for example. As a kid, I was just like, this is great. I don't see anything wrong with it. And then watching it again, I'm just sort of like, yeah, this is like one of the worst stories in Tom Baker's era.
Yeah, you're right. I think everyone does that though. Like, you kind of, especially as you said, stories you really liked as a kid, you kind of aren't such a big fan of now. Like, I know stories such as like Asylum of the Daleks, which I loved as a kid. I look back on it, I'm like, no, that's not really a good story at all. And yeah, I think it's interesting you say Caves of Androzani, because I haven't watched that yet in my marathon, and similar to Pyramids of Mars, I watched that at a similar time back in 2017, and again, I thought it was good, but I didn't really see why everyone says it was the best thing ever, and hopefully in my marathon I watch it and think, yeah, this is incredible. I watched a couple of clips because I was just kind of like watching the Doctor's regeneration clips one time because I was just bored, and watching like the Fifth Doctor's regeneration, and even like the cliffhanger of part 3 where it's like which is just incredible. So I hope that when I rewatch it, I kind of see why everyone loves it so much, because obviously last time I watched it, that was like 3 years ago, and I hadn't watched a lot of classic series at that point. I think I'd only seen maybe one Davison story before I watched Caves of Androzani, so
right.
I didn't really I wasn't as in love with it, whereas now I've watched a lot more Davison, so hopefully it clicks with me a lot more. But I think it's certainly interesting with the Tom Baker era. Those first 3 series are really solid, and then it is a bit hit and miss. After that, Tom himself gets a lot more jovial and off the wall. As it progresses, you get a lot of different companions coming and going, and yeah, it is almost like an era. Well, it is like an era in itself. Like, people talk about like the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. The Tom Baker era is like a whole run of Doctor Who in itself. It's so vast and so big and so different to each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably multiple eras within the Tom Baker years as well, which is mad. Because I mean, there is definitely a tonal shift as well that I've noticed, particularly with the Graham Williams compared to the Robert Holmes Hinchcliffe era. Which, I mean, it all depends what you want. I think it's great because it's got such variety about it. But I understand. I mean, for me personally, like the Key to Time stuff, I can take or leave. I enjoy half of that series. The other half I think is terrible. I mean, there are some stories that I feel are underappreciated, like Nightmare of Eden, for example. I think that is a great story that is wrapped up in terrible special effects and terrible set design. Yeah. I think the story itself is fantastic, but whereas I think Destiny of the Daleks had the opposite problem. It looks good, like the Daleks look great, the sets look great, you know, everyone's performing great, the location stuff is brilliant, but the story is so crap. And I think it depends. Like, when I was a kid, it depends what you're watching for, because as a kid I was just sort of like, well, Tom's in it, the Daleks are in it, I enjoy it. Whereas now it's just like, well, I appreciate more than just that, because I enjoy the characters, I enjoy the interactions, I enjoy the story and the plots and how it fits into all the continuities and all this other stuff, and it's just terrible. Like, Davros is awful in that story. I mean, season 17 as a whole I think is pretty crap, apart from Sharda, City of Death, and Nightmare of Eden, but everything else I'm just like, I will happily never watch them again.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that I don't mind Creature from the Pit, sorry, but it's not amazing. It's just kind of like a 6.5 out of 10 is just kind of there. And yeah, Destiny and Horns and Nimon are terrible.
Horns and Nimon is so bad.
It is. It's almost funny how bad it is. Like, Soldeed is just hilarious,
and he could have been the 4th Doctor.
I know, that's funny. I love the I don't know if you've seen it, but the like How Many Nimons Have You Seen Today?
Yeah.
YouTube, it just makes it so hilarious. But while you're watching it, the story is so bad it's good, but also so bad it's just boring at the same time. I don't know how it manages to be both for me. But it's kind of like, whenever Soldeed's on screen, it's so bad it's good. And then whenever he's not, it's so bad that it's just boring. But yeah, it's a terrible story. Horns and Nimon. And it's kind of disappointing that essentially is the story the Graham Williams era went out on. Because obviously Sharda is a good story, but it was never broadcast. So at the time, the last thing you would have seen of the Graham Williams era would have just been the Horns and Nimon, and that is a very embarrassing story to go out on.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I think it was like last week I watched Sharda, like the animation and stuff, and it's just like, I'm gutted that didn't get made, because it is genuinely a great story, and I wish... That's another one, really. I think maybe because it wasn't completed and people don't see it as a proper story because it wasn't finished or whatever, I don't know. But it's not really spoken about, and it's so good. But I think Tom's era is, because you have got these classic stories like Seeds of Doom, Genesis and whatnot, there are other stories that just go overlooked, like I mentioned Nightmare of Eden before, and what else do I really like? I mean, Horror of Fang Rock as well, that's a brilliant story, and I don't really hear people talking about it that much. And again, that's another one. When I was a kid, I really didn't like Horror of Fang Rock, because I was just like, well, the monster's barely in it. But then when I watch it now as an adult, I'm just like, yeah, but the story's good. It's about the atmosphere and it's about the tension and, you know, this horrible feeling that, you know, anyone can be picked off at any minute. Yeah. Whereas as a kid, I was just like, show me the big green jellyfish.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I mean, Tom's era is just brilliant. I love it. I mean, there's some terrible stuff in there that I will happily defend, like the Invasion of Time. I think that's a terrible story, but I love it. It's so much so I got it signed by Louise Jameson and John Leeson. So that's how much I love that one.
Yeah, I think it is certainly a good place to start with Doctor Who and classic Doctor Who, because it is so varied. There's kind of, it sums up Doctor Who perfectly in like just a few series. Like, it goes practically everywhere Doctor Who can go. Like, it's so varied. You've got the gothic horror of the early years, and then the kind of the comic side of the Graham Williams era, and then the kind of more hard science approach of the last John Nathan Turner season. So yeah, I guess there's something for everyone really in the Tom Baker era, and a companion for everyone. And yeah, it's so varied.
I mean, the one disappointment about season 18 is kind of like I was saying before about the fact that it does kind of feel like they were just, everything else about the show had changed. They were just kind of getting Tom out the door, and it's just like, oh well, he's doing another one. Bugger. I mean, that kind of annoys me. But I mean, I love Logopolis. I absolutely adore Logopolis. I think maybe that is due to childhood nostalgia, because obviously as a kid you love to see your favourite characters die.
Yeah.
But I just love that episode, and the Keeper of Traken I think is brilliant as well. And Warrior's Gate. Have you seen Warrior's Gate?
Yeah, I've seen all of season 18. I actually really like season 18. Yeah, I think it's such an underrated season.
I like it a lot, but Warrior's Gate makes no sense whatsoever. I still don't know what it means. I don't know what story it's trying to tell.
No,
but visually, it's interesting, so I keep with it, and it's really weird.
I don't know what's going on. I've no idea, like, what's going on with, like, when they go into the mirror and there's the world of the Farrells that kind of coincides with the other world. It's that I have no idea what that is supposed to mean, but it is enjoyable. Like, the visual side, and it's kind of trippy in some places, and yeah, it is a good story, but I don't understand what's going on. But I think season 18 and the E-Space trilogy actually I really enjoy. I think Full Circle I think is such an underrated story. I really like that one. Yeah, because that was one of the, I'm not going to say were the earlier Tom Baker stories I watched, but it's the first season 18 story I watched, and I remember I'd heard no one mention this story, and I just watched it and I really enjoyed Full Circle. I thought, yeah, this is great. I love the music. I think there's some interesting concepts. I actually think Tom's really good in it as well, and I actually like Adric in Full Circle, I'll be honest. I think he's actually pretty good for most of season 18 actually.
I agree. I actually think he's better with Tom.
I'd agree. Yeah, I think so. I think there are a couple of moments, I think in State of Decay, I think he's a little bit irritating, but I think just generally, I think, yeah, he works. I think he works quite well with Romana and K9. I think that's actually quite a little cool TARDIS team, actually, that we never really saw much of. And then I think he actually works really well with just him and Tom. I know we got like one and a bit stories of that, but I think that would have actually been a really cool like TARDIS team of like the Doctor showing this young kid the universe and kind of educating him on our universe. I think that would have been really cool. It's kind of a shame we didn't actually see more of that.
Yeah, I agree, because I think a lot of people give Adric unnecessary stick, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that he's a good actor, because I don't think he is. But like, he's better than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know what it is, but with Davison, I don't think it really clicks. I don't think Adric is. Yeah. He's not necessary in season 19. Whereas I think the dynamic with him and Tom, it was kind of somewhat reminiscent of the Doctor's relationship with Leela, because it's like a student-teacher type thing, but just a slightly different spin on it, and that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it is what it is. But I mean, like I said, that era in itself, like we were saying, is so big that people can just dive into that and find what they enjoy from it and whatnot. And I mean, it's brilliant. I love it. I can watch it over and over and over again, and I'll never get bored.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you said, it is so varied, and there's something in there for everyone. There's so many great stories, so many underrated gems as well. Like I was saying, Full Circle, you mentioned Nightmare of Eden, stories that no one really mentions. I think season 18 is full of underrated gems. Like I think the whole E-Space treasure. I think State of Decay is really good.
I love State of Decay. That's my favourite. The only annoying thing for me is that it is essentially in the wrong place, because it should be in like season 13. Like that sort of weird like gothic vampire horror story. It shouldn't be in season 18. But apart from that, I mean, I I just love the progression of Tom's Doctor as well.
Yeah.
Like how he for me is just the definitive Doctor. Like he sort of took what Troughton did and ran with it even further than Troughton ever possibly could, because Tom himself is probably an alien, and it's like you are. I mean, I've met him a couple of times, and it is like meeting an alien. He's such a strange man, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. He is so weird.
Yeah.
Like in interviews and stuff, some of the stuff he comes out with, I implore anyone to go and check out any interview with Tom Baker, because I guarantee you'll be scratching your head and laughing at the same time, because he is such a weird man, and it comes across in leaps and bounds in the series itself. Like he's such a that Doctor is just, whenever I think of who the Doctor is, that's the incarnation that I think of. Everything that I love about the character is the Fourth Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess because Tom was the Doctor for so long, he kind of became everything the Doctor could be.
Yeah.
Because every single trait you associate with any incarnation of the Doctor, the Fourth Doctor has become at some point, which I think is almost why he's the definitive, because, like I said, every single character trait you associate with the Doctor is in the Fourth Doctor at some point throughout his era, because he was there for so long.
I agree, and it's such a shame that I don't really think we've had any other actor just throw themselves in as deep into that part as Tom did.
Absolutely.
Because I think he lived and breathed being the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I think all the other Doctors have played it incredibly well at some points. Maybe not Jodie, like we were saying before, but I think other Doctors, have literally just not necessarily just treated it as a job, but they don't live it. Whereas I feel like Tom lived it, and to a certain extent still probably does.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy to look at, because he's definitely, I mean, all of the Doctors probably are going to get typecast, but I think him more so than others. And I don't think he minds. I think he's just like, well, I'd rather be loved for playing essentially who I am than it just being another part, because I don't think it was just another part to him. And I think that comes across on screen.
Absolutely.
He tried to make that part the best it possibly could be. And even though it didn't always work, I do think there are points in his era where he gets too silly. And I think there's obvious times when he is noticeably not enjoying himself, particularly in season 18. But it doesn't detract it from me. He gave his everything for that part. And I think more than anything, that's what I love about Tom Baker as a person. The fact that he gave his all to that part, which not many other Doctors can say. I don't think any of them can say that to the same extent, really.
I'd agree. I think, even Thomas said in interviews, he wasn't acting, he was just playing himself, and that's what comes across. Tom Baker is essentially the Doctor, just his mannerisms, how he speaks, how he is in interviews. Yeah, there's very little to distinguish the actor from the character. I don't really think we've seen that. There are people like my favourite Doctor's Matt Smith. I think he embodies the Doctor amazingly, but there isn't that thing with the actor and the character like there is with Tom. Like I said, Tom and the Doctor, they're practically indistinguishable. They're the same person, and I think that just adds something to his performance.
Yeah, it really does. And what helps is, like I say, the fact that Tom is so weird as a person, which all the others, I can't really say that they are. Yeah. I mean, some of them are quirky and whatnot, but I think the others are professional actors, whereas Tom is just a professional Time Lord, to be honest. That's how it comes across.
Exactly. He was born to play that role realistically.
Definitely. But I mean, in terms of other sort of alien Doctors as well, Troughton is definitely one that is becoming another truly loved one for me. Troughton is, I mean, I think for me he's the template for every other Doctor.
I'd agree.
So yeah, I really wish that they find more of his stories or they animate more of them, because Fury from the Deep's coming out and I can't actually wait.
So I think that the 60s is also a really interesting period for me, because it's another period of the classic era which no one really speaks about. I think that I found myself really enjoying a lot of Hartnell and Troughton stories, because there's just something so weird about them that, I don't know what it is about the 60s. I don't know if it's in black and white, or because some of it's missing, or just the sound design. I don't even know, but it feels so atmospheric and so creepy in places as well. I was watching the Aztecs, and there's just something about that story, that just where they are. And I think I don't know if it's because it's in black and white, but it feels so different to every other era, and that applies to the Troughton stories as well. It's just something just so weird about that era that I just love. It really separates it from every other era. And again, not a lot of people talk about the 60s, I think, especially the Hartnell era, and even the Troughton era as well. There's certainly a lot of stories kind of get forgotten about, which I think is a shame, because there are so many good stories, and I find that era so appealing, just because I said, because there's just something about it that is just so different from any other era of Doctor Who. And I don't know if it's just because it's in black and white, but there's something just so unnerving and atmospheric about those serials that I don't think has ever been replicated in any era that wasn't the 60s.
Yeah, no, I agree. There is something in that with the black and white and the music and stuff. It definitely adds something. And it's weird because even in the early Perkley years, it doesn't really feel like, because it was probably made in the 60s, and a lot of the people were similar production team as the previous era, and yet it feels totally different, which, rightly or wrongly, is the way to go, and the way that they did go. But yeah, I there is something about 60s Doctor Who that I can't really put my finger on, that there is something about it that just makes it stand out. And I do think you're right. I don't think people talk about it enough, really. It is one of those, I just wish people would go back and watch it more. I know it's difficult because of the reconstructions or the telesnaps or whatever, or them just not existing at all. But thankfully, with the animations and stuff, like Power of the Daleks re-release came out recently, Fury from the Deep I mentioned, and like Macra Terror, Faceless Ones, whatnot. Yeah. Like there's some stories coming out now, and hopefully people check them out and watch them, because they are genuinely phenomenal.
Yeah, I don't know whether a lot of people are kind of put off the black and white, because I imagine a lot of younger people going in to watch like the classic series would naturally gravitate to Pertwee or Tom Baker. And I guess that even myself, I didn't expect to enjoy like black and white serials quite as much as I have, because it's so far removed from all the other TV I enjoy, yet there's just something about it that I just absolutely love. And I think in a sense that's kind of just general for Doctor Who, and just classic Doctor Who especially, is that it is quite different from everything else I usually watch, but there's just something about it that just appeals to me so much. And I think that that can be really summed up in the 60s, because there's just something so weird and atmospheric about it. It almost feels like, in ways, like you're not supposed to be watching it. I don't know whether that's because some of them are lost and you literally can't watch them, but there's just something. So, like, it feels that they were made in a different time, more so than any other era of Doctor Who. I don't know if that's just because it's black and white, but it feels so different, and it is definitely underrated. But as you said, with the animations and things, it's getting more of a spotlight on it, which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The black and white thing, I think, is a shame, because it shouldn't make a difference, really. It shouldn't put people off, but it does. And to be honest, the black and white does make a difference. It's like when we've been getting the animated DVDs and whatnot, they come with a colour option as well, but we'll just watch them in black and white, because it doesn't feel right watching a Troughton story in colour. Like, it's fine when he appears again later on in like the 3 Doctors, 5 Doctors, 2 Doctors, but in his own era, like, I don't want to see the Macra Terror in colour. Like, I want to see it with this creepy black and white atmosphere, and like with the Faceless Ones, I don't want to watch an animated part 1 and 3 if the real part exists. I want to see it in its full glory. Like, it's such a beautiful era, and it's so weird and I'm really starting to get an appreciation of it now that I didn't really have when I was younger. And maybe it is because I was younger and a bit stubborn and stuck up and just being like, well, it's in black and white, I'm not that interested. But I've always liked the Invasion, which is weird. I don't know, but now I'm giving it more of a chance. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I think the more I watch, the more I just love of classic Doctor Who, and it's weird, because the more I watch of the new series, the more I think this is a bit rubbish. The more I watch of the classic era, I'm like, the more I enjoy this. This is amazing. So it's weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're correct about like the colour versions of the animations, because I watched Power of the Daleks for the first time on BritBox, and annoyingly they just have the colour version on there. But I manually turned my TV to black and white because it doesn't feel right watching a 60s story without it being black and white. I think there's just something ingrained in that era. The black and white just suits it so much that I don't think those Hartnell stories or those Troughton stories would be better if they were in colour. I think you would lose something, like you'd lose that atmosphere, like I was talking about, like the Aztecs or the original Dalek story, like the sound design and that kind of weird, creepy atmosphere of the Dalek city and the metal forest. And if that was in colour, that would you'd lose so much atmosphere or from those stories. And I was watching the Sensorites as well. There's just something so weird about that story because it's in black and white, and you even get to like Troughton stories like the Macra Terror and Power of the Daleks and the Ice Warriors. That's actually something I'd say. I think Snow in black and white Doctor Who works so well, even if it's clearly not actual snow. Just something about it I think works so well. Like I was watching the Ice Warriors and even like bits in like the fourth part of the Keys of Marinus, I think, is set in like the snow, and that there's something about like it being black and white and there being like a blizzard that just makes it so unnerving. And the atmosphere of those 60 stories, I think, adds so much to it. And I think if you watched it in colour, it would detract from the experience.
I mean, I think part of the problem with 80s Doctor Who is that it's so colourful and it's so bright that it's like it kind of takes away from it. Whereas I think with the black and white, I think it hides something. I think a lot of the stuff in the 60s would look crap in colour, but the black and white gives it that edge, it gives it that darkness and that, the shading on it and whatnot. Where, I mean, the 80s I love, but I'm not going to deny that it is way too bright and way too overlit, coloured and everything. It's just it's mental, but... Oh, I mean, it's something for everybody. That's what I love about classic Doctor Who. Like, there's so many different eras, so many different styles, so many different approaches to similar sort of things, really. And it's what you personally prefer. Like, I think the way that they approach everything is unique and different and interesting. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it's very, very bad. And other times, you have to put up with dodgy, wobbly sets that are overlit and monsters that look terrible and the actors in them are too fat to wear the costumes and whatnot. You have to put up with that because the stories are so good. Whereas now, especially in the last few years, not just Jodie but also with Capaldi as well, it is a lot more style over substance. Like, these stories, they look incredible. The set design, the costumes and everything is amazing, but the heart isn't there.
I think the Ghost Monument is a good example. Like, that episode looks incredible, but the story is just paper thin. Like, nothing happens in the story, but it looks incredible. And then you get on the flip side of some classic stories where the budget is just not there, like Nightmare of Eden. The budget is not there for that story, but the storyline is great. I really like Nightmare of Eden, like yourself, and the budget's not there, but the story's so great. And I think that, I guess with all Doctor, it's just working with what you've got. And I think sometimes maybe the budget restraints actually enhanced it because they really had to focus on the story. And I would agree with you on the 80s being so colourful. Like, I was talking about like the Ice Warriors and the Keys of Marinus and stories like that where it's like they're in a blizzard and it feels so atmospheric because it's black and white. If they attempted like a blizzard in like an overlit, colourful 80s set, it would look terrible. But because it's in the black and white, it works.
I think they did attempt it in one of them, and I can't. I'm sure it was a Collins story that there was some sort
of Revelation of the Daleks. Is that the one where that's in the snow?
I think the first part of that's in the snow. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. But either way, it just doesn't work. But I'd rather have that than style over substance, like we were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the classic show, it is such a gold mine of Doctor Who, and I think delving into the classic series for the first time is such a great experience. Like, watching, for me, a load of classic stories that I just haven't seen before. It's new Doctor Who that I just haven't seen, and it's from a different era, it's a different time, but in some sense it's more interesting than watching like the Revived series, even though I always love the Revived series and it's what I grew up with, so I'm going to have an attachment to that. But there's almost something so more interesting watching a story from a different time than if you were to watch a story made today, because I don't know, it almost feels like a little time capsule of like the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s, which I just think is so interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree. They are sort of a moment in their era. Like, you couldn't make something like Power of the Daleks in, I don't know, McCoy's era, but you also couldn't make something like Seeds of Doom in Eccleston's era. Something like that. It is quite interesting, that. But I suppose that's what makes Doctor Who as unique as it does, because a lot of it is sort of time stamped and timeless at the same time. It's weird.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, especially with all Doctor Who, but I think especially in the classic series, you can really tell the era it was made by the stories. Like, if you watch any 80s story, like, there's no in your mind that that's made in the 80s. Like, I don't know, maybe that's something we lose more in the Revive series, that you don't really, like, you could watch something from Series 6, and if someone said that was made in 2020, you'd probably believe them, but if you watch like Terror of the Autumns, and someone was to say that was made in the 90s, you'd be like, no, that's made in the 70s. It's so clearly made in the 70s. I don't just think that's a budget thing. I just think that they're so ingrained in the era they're from, which I think is great, watching them from someone who wasn't like around in that era. It just makes it so much more fascinating as a story.
Yeah, I agree. There's a few stories that, in the modern era, that I look back, that if I didn't know what year they were made, I could guess any year, and just, like, they're not really ingrained in. No. I mean, what actually happened in 2007? Like, nothing. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just one of them. Whereas in the 80s, it's like there's a distinct style. In the 70s, there's a distinct style. But in the noughties and the 10s, there's not really a style. It's just special effects got better, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, imagine in like 50 years time and someone was to do like a Life on Mars thing, but they go back to policing in like the 2010s. That would be boring, because there's nothing special in the 2010s. But if you go back to the 70s or the 80s, like they did with Ashes to Ashes, it's just something about those eras which they're just so unique. And like you said, like, I was watching the Impossible Astronaut Day of the Moon, and I don't know if it's just a budget thing because that story looks incredible, but if you were to say that was made now, I'd 100% believe you. I think with the Revive series, the only thing that really dates it is like the phones that they use. Like, in the Impossible Astronaut, Amy's using like a flip phone, so obviously you can say, well, that was made in 2011. But apart from that, you would absolutely believe that they were made now, whereas in the classic series, every single story feels like a product of its time, which, like I said, I think is very fascinating watching it from, like, both me and you, like, we weren't around in like the 70s or the 80s, so maybe that's why we find it more interesting, because we weren't around in those times to watch something from that era. I guess, like, it does feel like a time capsule of another time because we weren't around, whereas maybe one of the reasons why we think that the Revive series isn't unique because we've lived those years, so it just feels normal to us.
Whereas possibly.
Watching something that was around when we weren't around, it feels like so different because obviously it's a completely different era to what we know.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's probably people who are from the 70s, maybe if they listen to this, are just sort of like, what was special about the 70s? Like, there was nothing special. So, maybe there's something in that, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the classic series is just great and such a goldmine, and the classic series is so unique, and maybe, like, that's something we don't get in the Revive series, like I was thinking. Like, with the classic series, you've got three very distinct eras, the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s, but with the Revive series, like, if you were to say, like, people say, 80s Doctor Who, or 70s Doctor Who, you won't get someone say, 2010s Doctor Who, because the 2010s, I guess, were such a varied time for Doctor Who in the sense that there's so many distinct eras in that feel very different. Like, it starts with Matt Smith and ends in Jodie Whittaker. Like, you wouldn't sum that up as, like, one era at all, but you would quite easily probably sum up the 80s as an era, or the 70s as an era, which I don't know if that's just the time thing, or I don't really know what that is, but I guess that's certainly something.
Maybe it is just being from where we are from, essentially. I think that's probably it, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right, and I guess that's probably why the classic series is so appealing to new fans. It's like I say, it's just a slice of another time, and Doctor Who
Yeah,
in
I think
the
that's why it appealed to me, to be honest.
yeah,
Like, because I've always liked older shows anyway, like stuff like Only Fools and Horses, for example, stuff like that. I've always loved. So I don't know, maybe I was born in the wrong era myself. Who's to say?
yeah, I think that the classic series is great, and I don't think we've quite had so much variety in the revived series as we did in the classic series. I don't know whether that's just Doctor Who trying to be more consistent to itself. I don't really know, but I think certainly while I love the revived series, there certainly is an appeal to the variety that you get in the classic series that makes it slightly more interesting. I think as like an era to watch.
Yeah, I agree. So the message of this podcast is go and watch the classic era if you haven't already.
You should go and watch the classic series because it's great. And I know a lot of people probably who've watched the revived series and probably think, well, the classic series is a bit weird. And even when I first started, I was like, well, it doesn't look very good. The pacing's weird. It's in 25 minutes installments of multiple parts. That it's completely different from the revived series. But once you start watching it and you really get into it, it's like just a common thing. Like you stop thinking about how it's different, and it just feels like just feels natural that this is in these parts, and it looks a certain way, and you start to just you don't notice how bad some of the stories look some of the time because it just goes over your head because you're used to it and you just get ingrained in the story, which I think is so great about the classic series. And I'm glad I'm able to do this because I understand that for some people they're unable to kind of switch their brain off from the bad production values, and fair enough, I can understand why, but I think if you just kind of try and look over that and really appreciate the stories, there's some absolutely brilliant stories in there and some brilliant doctors in there as well.
Yeah, I think well, there's a few duds in there, but consistently it's pretty great.
Yeah,
whereas the new series isn't. For me, I don't know, maybe I'm just turning more cynical as I get older. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there might be something in that because, for example, I prefer. I don't know. I'm more kind on the season 22 Colin and Perry relationship than I am on the series 8 Capaldi and Clara relationship, even though it's
the same.
And I don't know if that's just because at the time, especially, because series 8 was my first live change from a Doctor. I'd gone back and watched Eccleston and Tennant, but that was kind of my first live handing over from a Doctor, and because Clara acted like she just hated this Doctor from the off, it was very hard to connect to that Doctor, and I just really disliked their constant bickering, and maybe I just have a bias towards that, but yeah, it's weird that I don't really like that at all and despise that relationship, but even though I'm not the biggest fan of it, I am kind of on the Colin and Perry relationship. I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's just because it wasn't happening while we were watching it at the time, and maybe if we were watching it back in the 80s, we would have hated it more. I don't know, but yeah, I think there's certainly something. If you're not watching something live, you're going to be more nice on it, I guess, than if you're watching something live and you don't. I guess maybe it's because you know where the Colin and Perry relationship goes, you're more kind on it, whereas at the time you had no idea where that Capaldi and Clara relationship was going, so even though you do know where it's going now, you kind of still have that bias against it because of how you felt about it at the time, maybe.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, I think everyone has biases towards all the stuff. They sort of give it a bit of a pass. It's well, it's from a different time. Whereas now it's just this is the here and now. There's this thing over there that's doing that better than what you're doing, and there's social media as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with you, and yeah, I think that there's obviously something in that, and we all have our biases, but as you said, the main kind of thing to go out from this podcast is just give Classic Doctor Who a try. And I guess the thing is what I guess we could sum up this podcast is that Doctor Who has his ups and downs all the time. Now it's in its more down periods, but I think something that we can say is that any era of Doctor Who, it has its brilliant points, whether that's the Revive series or the Classic series. And I guess if there's one thing to sum up this podcast, it's just that even though Doctor Who has its faults, overall it is pretty great.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%. I endorse this message.
Yeah. So we've been recording. Jesus, we're coming up to like 3 hours now, which is ridiculous.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's like we've been recording for 2 hours and 47 minutes, which is mental. That's the longest podcast I think I've recorded so far. But yeah, it's been absolutely great talking to you, Wingy. It's been absolutely fantastic. I think we've had a great conversation and I've covered a lot of bases. It's been fantastic.
I agree. I'll be back anytime.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on. And yeah, I've said this on my other podcast where I've had guests on, but I say the same thing. Just said the same thing here. Sorry, but just thank you for so much for coming on, because I know I'm like a smaller YouTuber and you probably don't really know who I am. No one really does. So yes, just thank you so much for kind of taking the leap and coming on. I really appreciate that.
No, it's my pleasure, man. I was in that position where I was just like, nobody knows who I am, nobody cares about me and all that sort of stuff. But you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? So
yeah, thank you so much for that. And as I said, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. Is there anything you wanna plug?
Well, there's my channel. That's about it, really. I've got, well, as I mentioned before, I've got a review of Series 5 coming out. I've got some other new stuff coming out.
Yeah.
So that's about it, really. Just make sure that if you want, go and check out my channel and subscribe to this channel as well, because I've enjoyed this and I'm going to go and recommend this channel to other people and whatnot. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
Not a problem, man.
That means a lot. And yeah, anyone who isn't subscribed to Wingy Media, I don't know why you wouldn't be, because if you're clicking on this, you're probably clicking on it because of him. But if by some chance you're not subscribed to him, just go and check his channel out, because it's fantastic and you make such a variety of different videos. I think, yeah, anyone who hasn't checked out your channel definitely should, because yeah, hours of fun watching your videos. And yeah,
thanks, man.
No, it is no problem. Yeah, anyone, just go subscribe. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. And thank you for any viewers who are still watching at this point. If you're somehow got nothing to do and are still listening to this 2 hours and 50 minutes in, then thank you so much for watching, and thanks for coming on. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and of course, a goodbye.